Don't let them take the case." The old man's fingers clamped around his wrist like a vice, the grip of someone using every last ounce of strength just to hold on. Jack Mercer looked down at those cracked, sunburned knuckles and felt something shift inside his chest. Something he hadn't felt in 11 months of running. This was a stranger. This was nobody he knew. This was none of his business. And yet, here he was, kneeling in the Arizona dirt, refusing to leave. If you've ever wondered what it looks like when one broken man decides to stop running, keep watching. Drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels. And if it moves you, subscribe, because this one's only getting started. Jack Mercer had a rule. It was a simple rule. One he had followed for 11 months straight, through Nevada, New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, and back again through the jagged belly of Arizona. The rule was this: keep moving. Keep moving, and you don't have to think. Keep moving, and the wind in your face is loud enough to drown out the voice in your head that sounds exactly like your dead brother. Keep moving, and the grief stays somewhere behind you. Not gone, never gone, but at least a few miles back, eating your dust, unable to quite catch up. That was the rule. Jack was very good at following that rule. Until the morning, he almost wasn't. It was barely past 9 o'clock, and the heat was already brutal. The kind of August heat that doesn't creep up on you. It ambushes you, like a door slamming open on a furnace. Route 66 stretched out ahead of him in both directions, flat and merciless and shimmering at the edges. The asphalt already soft enough that you could feel it trying to grab the tires. The sky was the color of bleached bone. Jack had been riding since 4 in the morning. He liked it that way. The dark hours were easier. Fewer cars, fewer people, fewer reasons to slow down. How was 50 years old? 6 feet 2 inches of road-worn muscle, with forearms that looked like they'd been sculpted from weathered oak, and a jaw that hadn't been clean-shaven since the previous administration. His blonde hair was longer than it used to be. The vest across his shoulders bore the colors of his chapter: the winged skull, the bottom rocker that said Arizona, and across his back, the name that had followed him for 22 years in the club: Nomad. It had seemed like the right name once. Now it felt like a diagnosis. He was doing about 65, not too fast, not too slow. The Harley moved beneath him like an extension of his own skeleton, every vibration familiar, every sound catalogued. He knew that bike the way some men know their wives. Every mood, every complaint, every small mechanical whisper that meant something. That was why, when he glanced up into his right mirror, he noticed the truck. White pickup. Mid-90s, maybe older. Sitting crooked on the shoulder, the way a vehicle sits when it hasn't been parked, when it's been abandoned, or when whoever was driving it didn't have the luxury of pulling over carefully. Jack saw it and kept riding. "Not your problem," said the voice in his head. "The practical one. The sensible one. You don't even know those people." He was 200 yards past it when he checked his mirror again. And that's when he saw the hand. Joel. Just a hand. Pale. Reaching out from behind the rear quarter panel of the truck, fingers loose, the wrist resting in the gravel, like someone had simply given up trying to hold it up anymore. Jack's brain processed several things simultaneously in approximately 2 seconds. 1. That hand was not waving. Waving means you have enough energy to wave. That hand was just there. Present. Barely. 2. It was already past 9. The temperature was already over 100. By noon, it would be 115. 3. This stretch of Route 66 between Kingman and the California border was not the kind of road where a lot of people stopped to check on strangers. He was already decelerating before he made the conscious decision. He pulled a U-turn on the empty highway, tires grinding gravel, and rode back. "Keep moving," said the voice. "Shut up," Jack said out loud, to nobody, in the middle of the Arizona desert. He parked the Harley and walked toward the truck. What he found behind that pickup could have broken a softer man. 2 people. Both of them in bad shape, both of them on the ground. The woman was young, late 20s maybe, with blonde hair that was matted against her forehead and eyes that were red from crying, or from the sun, or from both. She had her father's head in her lap, and she was fanning his face with a road atlas that she must have been at for a while, because her arm was trembling with the effort. She looked up when Jack's shadow fell over her, and he saw it immediately. That particular expression that crosses a person's face when they're terrified and exhausted and relieved all at the same time, and don't know which one to lead with. Then she registered what she was actually looking at. A 6'2" biker, arms covered in ink. Hell's Angels across his chest, desert sweat on his face, sunglasses hiding his eyes. The relief evaporated. "Stay back," she said. Her voice was hoarse. "I'm serious. Stay back." Jack stopped walking, held both hands out to his sides, palms open. No sudden moves, like approaching something wild. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. His voice was calm, flat. The voice of a man who understood that the situation required steadiness more than warmth right now. "How long have you been out here?" She stared at him. "Ma'am," he said. "How long?" She swallowed. 2 hours, maybe 2.5. Jack crouched down, slowly, keeping his distance, and looked at the man in her lap. Older. 60s. His skin was the color and texture of a baked clay pot, flushed deep red with heat. His breathing was shallow. Too shallow. His lips were cracked. His eyes were closed but moving underneath the lids. Not peacefully, not like sleep, like something struggling to stay running on empty. "Does he have any medical conditions?" Jack asked. "He has a heart thing. He takes medication. He took it this morning, but I don't know if—" She stopped. She was trying very hard not to fall apart, and Jack could see her choosing, actively choosing, to hold it together. He respected that. "The truck just died," she continued, the words spilling out faster now that she'd started. "We were just driving and it died, and we had water but not enough, and I've been trying to keep him cool, but it's so hot and I don't have signal." "Okay," Jack said quietly. "Okay, listen to me. I've got supplies, and I've got a satellite beacon. Can you stay calm for about 3 more minutes while I get them?" She looked at him, at the vest, at the tattoos. "Please," she said. The word cost her something. He could see it. 3 minutes, he said. "I'll be right back." I was back in 2. He had a foil emergency tarp from his left saddlebag, a collapsible shade pole he'd been carrying since a bad experience in Nevada 2 summers ago, 3 liters of water in insulated bottles, a small first aid kit, and the kind of clear-headedness that some people are just born with in a crisis and some people earn the hard way. Jack had earned his. I didn't think about the heat. He didn't think about the fact that he was burning through the morning he'd planned to spend alone. He thought about the man on the ground and the order of operations required to keep that man alive until real help arrived. First, shade. He had the tarp up in under 4 minutes, rigged to the side of the truck, blocking the direct sun. Not perfect, good enough. Second, water. Slow, small amounts. You don't pour water into someone who's this far gone. You offer it by the capful. You let the body ask for more. "Has he been able to drink anything?" Jack asked the woman as he worked. "Some. Not much. He keeps saying he's not thirsty, and I keep telling him that's the problem." "That's exactly the problem," Jack confirmed. "When you stop feeling thirsty out here, that's when you're in real trouble." He tilted the bottle carefully. "Sir. Hey. Can you hear me?" The old man's eyes didn't open, but his lips moved. "He can hear you," the woman said quickly. "He's in there. I know he's in there." "I know he is too," Jack said. He said it with certainty, with the kind of confidence that isn't about being certain. It's about deciding the other option isn't acceptable. He uncapped the satellite emergency beacon from the exterior pocket of his saddlebag and activated it with 2 steady presses. The light went from red to green. Somewhere, a signal was moving upward and outward toward a satellite, and then back down to a dispatch center that would now be reading their coordinates. "Help's coming," he said. The woman exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that she'd clearly been holding for a very long time. "I'm Emily," she said. "Jack." She looked at the vest again, back at his face. "Are you going to stay?" Until the ambulance gets here. Yeah. She almost said something, swallowed it, said instead, "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Jack said, not unkindly. "Let's just get him through the next hour." 20 minutes passed. Jack kept talking to the old man. Quietly, steadily, the way you'd talk someone back from a ledge. Not pulling, just letting your voice be the thing they could follow back toward the surface. He used damp cloth from the first aid kit on the man's wrists and the back of his neck. He kept the shade positioned. He monitored the breathing. Emily watched him with an expression he couldn't quite categorize. Not trust exactly. Not yet. Something more like suspended judgment. Like she was watching to see who he was going to turn out to be before she committed to an opinion. That was fair. Jack had no objections to being evaluated on evidence. Then the old man opened his eyes. They were pale blue. Sharp, even now. The eyes of someone who had spent decades looking at things with precision, with the trained attention of a person whose job had required him to notice what was wrong before it became catastrophic. He looked at the sky, looked at the tarp, looked at Jack. His right hand moved, slow and deliberate, found Jack's forearm, and gripped it. The grip was stronger than it should have been, much stronger. "Don't let them take the case," he said. His voice was a wreck, barely a whisper. But the words were clear. The words were chosen. The words were the first thing this man had chosen to spend his remaining strength on. Jack frowned. "Sir?" "The case," the old man repeated. His eyes held Jack's with an intensity that had nothing to do with delirium. This was lucid. This was deliberate. "Don't. Let them. Take it." Jack became aware, in that moment, of something he hadn't noticed in the controlled urgency of the first 20 minutes. The old man's left wrist. There was a chain. Short. Heavy-gauge steel, the kind you'd use to lock a bicycle or secure a gate. One end was secured to the man's wrist with a padlock. The other end was secured to the handle of a battered silver briefcase that was sitting in the dirt 6 inches from his body, half covered by his jacket. Jack stared at it. Emily's voice came from beside him, quiet and careful. "That's Dad's." "What's in it?" She hesitated. "Emily," he said, not unkindly. "What's in the case?" "Everything," she said. The ambulance arrived 31 minutes after Jack activated the beacon. The paramedics worked fast. They knew what they were looking at. Severe heat exhaustion bordering on heat stroke, dehydration, a patient in his 60s with a documented cardiac history. They loaded Robert Carter onto the gurney with the efficiency of people who had seen this before and were not interested in having to repeat the worst possible outcome. Emily climbed in beside him. She paused at the ambulance doors. "Our truck didn't break down by accident," she said to Jack. She said it quietly. She said it the way you say something when you've been holding it inside for hours, and you're not sure you should say it at all. But you know if you don't say it to someone right now, the weight of it is going to finish what the heat started. Jack looked at her. At the briefcase, which was still chained to her father's wrist, riding along on the gurney. He looked at the truck. He looked at the long empty highway in both directions. "What hospital?" he said. "Kingman Regional." He nodded once. Put his sunglasses back on. "I'll be right behind you," he said. He was. He followed the ambulance at a steady 60 miles per hour through the desert morning with the Harley's engine rumbling beneath him, like a conversation he wasn't quite having yet, a question he hadn't finished asking. He could have peeled off at the first intersection. Nothing required him to go to that hospital. He'd done the good deed. He'd activated the beacon. He'd kept the man alive. He'd discharged the obligation that most people wouldn't have stopped for in the first place. Nobody would have blamed him for going. He didn't go. He followed the red and white lights through the heat and the dust, and he didn't let himself think about why, because thinking about why would have required him to admit things he wasn't ready to admit yet. About what this felt like. About who it reminded him of. About the garage back home in Flagstaff that he hadn't opened in 11 months, because opening it meant seeing the workbench, and the workbench meant seeing the helmet that was still sitting right where Danny had left it the last time he'd come over to work on his bike. I didn't think about any of that. He just rode. Kingman Regional Medical Center smelled like every hospital Jack had ever been in. Antiseptic and old coffee, and something underneath both of those that he didn't have a name for and didn't want one. He found the waiting area for the emergency department and sat in a plastic chair that was approximately 2 sizes too small for his frame, and he waited. He took off his sunglasses. He had dark eyes. People were sometimes surprised by that. The blonde hair suggested light eyes, and the dark eyes suggested something unresolved, something complicated, which was more accurate than he would have liked. He sat there for an hour and a half. At one point, a nurse glanced at his vest, glanced at his face, and clearly decided that whatever she'd been about to say could wait. Jack noticed and said nothing. He was used to that. The vest had been opening some doors and closing others for 22 years. He had long since stopped caring which way the particular door swung, as long as the thing that mattered got done. What mattered right now was sitting in a room somewhere beyond those double doors, chained by the wrist to a battered silver briefcase. What mattered right now was a young woman who was probably in that same room, trying very hard not to cry. He stayed. Emily came out at 11:30. She'd been crying. She was done crying now. She had the particular stillness of someone who has cried everything they have and come out the other side into a kind of temporary calm. The eye of it, not the end of it. "He's stable," she said. "They said another 30 minutes out there might have—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "He's okay. He's going to be okay." "Good," Jack said. She sat down 2 chairs away from him. Not close, not far. The compromise of someone who hadn't decided yet. "You didn't leave," she said. "No." "Why?" Jack looked at his hands, turned them over. The tattoos ran from his wrists to his elbows on both sides. Images accumulated over decades. Some of them beautiful, some of them mistakes, all of them his. "You said the truck didn't break down by accident," he said. Emily was quiet for a moment. "The mechanic who looked at it this morning. Before we left Kingman, we stopped at a garage because the temperature gauge was running a little high. He checked it and said everything was fine. But when the tow truck driver looked at it, he said—" She stopped, started again. "He said someone had done something to the cooling system, deliberately. Something that would cause it to fail, but only after the truck had been driven for a while. So it would look like a mechanical failure in the middle of nowhere." Jack processed that. "Who knew your route?" he asked. "I don't know." She shook her head. "I don't know how they would have known. We didn't tell anyone." "Who's they?" She looked at him, making a decision. "I need to know if I can trust you," she said. Jack held her gaze. "I don't know how to make you trust me," he said honestly. "But I'm still here, and I didn't have to be. So make of that what you will." She studied him for another moment. Then she started talking. Oh. Her father's name was Robert Carter. He was 63 years old. He had spent 34 years as a water systems engineer, designing and inspecting municipal water infrastructure throughout the American Southwest. He was meticulous, Emily said. Methodical. The kind of man who kept notes on everything because he believed that what wasn't written down didn't exist, and what didn't exist couldn't protect anyone. 3 years ago, Robert had been conducting routine inspection reviews on a series of groundwater facilities operated by a private contractor called Desert Crown Utilities, a corporation that had won several large government contracts in drought-stressed Arizona communities over the preceding decade. He found things that didn't add up, contamination readings that changed between preliminary and final reports, groundwater monitoring data that seemed to have been adjusted after the fact, an inspection that had been scheduled and then canceled twice without explanation, a laboratory employee whose professional assessment seemed to shift significantly between one document and the next, with no record of what had caused the change in conclusion. By themselves, any one of these things might have been explainable. Bureaucratic error, communication failure, the general friction of institutions in motion. But Robert Carter was the kind of man who kept notes, and his notes, laid across each other in the right order, told a story that had nothing to do with bureaucratic error. Several rural families had become seriously ill. People who lived in communities served by Desert Crown facilities. People whose wells had been flagged in Robert's internal reports as requiring further investigation. Reports that subsequently disappeared before reaching the review committees that should have acted on them. He retired, but he didn't stop. For 3 years, quietly, carefully, he had been collecting. Original inspection records, internal emails, obtained through channels Emily was deliberately vague about, but obtained. Laboratory documentation, timelines, correspondence chains, the accumulated evidence of a very patient man who understood that the truth wasn't useful if it wasn't documented, and the documentation wasn't organized, and the organization wasn't airtight. It was all in the briefcase, and they had been driving to Prescott to hand it to a journalist named Sarah Whitmore. Someone apparently found out, Emily said. Jack was quiet for a long moment. How certain are you about the truck? The tow driver showed me. Her jaw was set. He's been doing that job for 19 years. He knows what a normal cooling system failure looks like. He knows what deliberate damage looks like. Did you file a police report? I called the sheriff's office from the hospital. They're sending someone. Jack nodded slowly. Then he stood up, walked to the window that faced the parking lot, and looked out. He stood there for about 10 seconds. His expression didn't change. He came back and sat down. There's a dark SUV, he said. It's done 3 passes through the parking lot in the last 20 minutes. Emily went still. They're watching the hospital, she said. Yeah, Jack said. I think so. She looked at him, and he could see it happening in real time. The wall she'd been maintaining between gratitude and full trust, beginning to develop a crack. Because she was sharp, this woman. She had been managing an impossible situation for hours, with no resources and no help, and she had held it together through all of it. But she was also alone in a waiting room in a hospital in a city she didn't live in, with her father in a hospital bed and a briefcase chained to his wrist, and someone circling outside who had already proven they were willing to strand 2 people in the desert to get what they wanted. She wasn't going to be able to do this alone. She knew it. Jack could see the moment she knew it. What do I do? She asked. Quiet. Stripped down to the actual question. Jack leaned forward, elbows on his knees. First, he said, you let your dad rest and let the doctors do their job. He's safe in there right now. Whatever they want is in that briefcase, and the briefcase isn't going anywhere without him. And then? And then I'm going to make a phone call, Jack said. To who? To someone I trust. A cop? Jack almost smiled. It was a small thing, gone fast. No, he said, not a cop. He stepped outside to make the call. He stood in the full Arizona sun, with the heat hammering at him from every angle, and he scrolled to a contact labeled simply Bishop and pressed call. It rang 3 times. Nomad. Ray Callahan's voice was the voice of a man who had been awake since 5 and had already had 3 cups of coffee and was on his 2nd cigarette of the hour and wasn't particularly surprised by anything. That was Bishop. Unshakable in the way that comes not from an absence of emotion, but from a surplus of experience. He had seen enough that very few things registered as genuine emergencies anymore. You actually calling me voluntarily, or did you sit on your phone again? I need to ask you something, Jack said. So ask. I found a situation, Jack said. He chose that word carefully. Situation. Bishop would understand the specific weight of that word coming from Jack, who had not voluntarily used it in 11 months. There was a brief pause. Not hesitation. Assessment. Tell me, Bishop said. Jack told him. All of it. The truck, the 2 people, the heat, the briefcase, the chain on the old man's wrist, what Emily had told him about Desert Crown, the SUV in the parking lot. Bishop listened without interrupting, which was one of the things that made him a good chapter president and an even better man. When Jack finished, there was a short silence. What do you need? Bishop asked. Witnesses, Jack said immediately. That's all. I need people who can stand somewhere visible and be seen, and make sure that whatever these people are thinking about doing, they think twice about doing it in public. You're not talking about— No, Jack said firmly. No threats, no weapons, no confrontation. I want cameras. I want witnesses. I want them to look at a crowd of people and decide whatever they're planning isn't worth the audience. Another brief silence. You understand this could get complicated, Bishop said. Not a warning, a fact. I know. You're asking me to put brothers in a situation we don't fully understand yet. I know that too. What's in the case, you think? Really? Jack looked back through the glass at the waiting room. At Emily, who was sitting very still with her hands in her lap, looking at nothing. I think it's the kind of evidence that ruins people, he said. The kind that doesn't get destroyed because it's worthless. The kind that gets destroyed because it's worth too much. Bishop was quiet for 3 full seconds. Before sunrise, he said. Bishop. Before sunrise, Nomad. Get some sleep if you can. Where are you? Kingman Regional. Good. A pause. And Jack. It was rare. Bishop almost never used his name. Jack's real name. Not the road name, not Nomad. Jack. Yeah, I'm glad you turned around. Jack stood in the August heat for a moment after the call ended. The sun was directly overhead now, and the parking lot shimmered, and somewhere in that shimmer, a dark SUV was doing another slow circuit of the hospital grounds, patient and watchful, and certain that eventually what it was waiting for would have to come out. Jack watched it complete the turn. He thought about a rule, a simple rule, about keeping moving. He thought about his brother. He put the phone in his pocket and went back inside. He spent the rest of that afternoon in the hospital. He bought bad coffee from a machine in the hallway and drank it standing up, because sitting still for too long made him aware of the ache in his lower back that came from too many hours on the road and too many years of sleeping on surfaces that weren't designed for sleeping. He checked the parking lot at regular intervals. He talked to Emily when she wanted to talk and didn't push when she didn't. At 4 in the afternoon, the doctors allowed a brief visit. Emily came back out 20 minutes later and stopped in front of Jack with an expression that was hard to read. A mixture of something broken and something decided. He wants to see you, she said. Jack raised an eyebrow. He specifically asked for the biker, Emily said, with the ghost of something that might have become a smile in different circumstances. Robert Carter looked considerably better than he had at the side of the road. The IV had done its work. The color in his face had normalized from the dangerous brick red to something closer to a healthy pink. His eyes were open and tracking and clear. The briefcase was on the bed beside him. His left wrist was still chained to it. He watched Jack come in. Watched him the way Emily had watched him in the waiting room, with the evaluating attention of someone making a careful assessment. You're the one who found us, Robert said. Yes, sir. You activated the beacon. Yes, sir. How long before you would have kept riding past? Jack considered the question seriously, because it deserved a serious answer. I almost did, he said. Then I saw your hand. Robert nodded slowly. He seemed to find that answer satisfactory in a way that a cleaner answer might not have been. Emily told me she told you about the case, Robert said. She told me some of it, and you're still here. I'm still here. Robert looked at the ceiling for a moment. I've spent 3 years on this, he said. Do you know what 3 years of trying to do the right thing through the right channels teaches you? Tell me. It teaches you that the right channels are exactly what people who don't want the truth to come out rely on, Robert said. They don't have to stop you if they can just redirect you, slow you down, lose your paperwork, cancel your appointments, reassign the reviewers, and if none of that works— He stopped. Well, now you know what else they try. Jack pulled the chair from the corner and sat down. Emily said you were meeting a journalist. Sarah Whitmore. She's good. She's careful. She's been working on Desert Crown from a different angle for months. Robert's fingers moved to the briefcase. This fills in the pieces she's been missing. The meeting location, Jack said. She knows it's been compromised? Robert's eyes sharpened. What do you mean? Emily said you didn't tell anyone your route, but someone knew. That means either your communication has been monitored or someone who knew the destination told someone else. Robert's jaw tightened. He hadn't thought about it from that angle. Or he had, and hadn't wanted to. Sarah's editor knows, Robert said, slowly. And the attorney helping us structure the document delivery. That's 2 people. Yes. Is either of them someone you'd stake your life on? A long pause. I was, Robert said quietly. 48 hours ago I was. They looked at each other. Okay, Jack said. Here's what I think we need to do differently. He leaned forward, and he started talking. That night, Emily sat across from Jack in the hospital cafeteria with 2 cups of better coffee. She'd found a place down the block that actually cared about it. And they talked about things that were not the briefcase, and not Desert Crown, and not the dark SUV that had, as of the last check, apparently given up on the parking lot for the evening. You've been writing for 11 months? She asked. About that. Where? Everywhere. Nowhere specific. He wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. I had a brother, Danny. He was 44. Heart attack. Just here and then not here. Emily didn't say, I'm sorry, immediately. She waited a beat, which he appreciated more than she probably knew, because I'm sorry, said too fast was just noise. Was he in the club too? She asked. No, he had a bike, but he was never a member. He just liked riding. Jack looked at the table. He was a better man than me in most of the ways that count. Quieter, more patient. He would stop for anyone on the side of the road without even having to think about it. Unlike you, Emily said. Unlike me, Jack agreed. I had to think about it. But you stopped. I stopped, he said. She considered him. I was scared of you, she said. When you walked up. I want you to know that. I was genuinely frightened. I know. And now I'm sitting here trusting you with my father's life and evidence that could... She shook her head. I don't know how to explain the gap between those 2 things. You don't have to, he said. It doesn't need explaining. You assessed the situation, and you made a decision based on what you could see. That's all anyone can do. She smiled at that. Small, but real. Outside, the Arizona night was enormous and star-strung and indifferent the way that desert nights are. All that immensity making human problems feel both urgent and impossibly small at the same time. Before midnight, Jack walked the perimeter of the parking lot one last time. The dark SUV was gone, but it would be back. He knew that the way he knew the sound of his own engine, not because anyone had told him, but because he understood the particular patience of people who believed they had already won and were simply waiting for the timing to become convenient. They didn't understand yet that the timing was about to stop being convenient. He took out his phone and sent Bishop a single text. Still need those witnesses. Bring cameras. The reply came in 4 seconds. Already rolling. Jack stood in the parking lot beneath a sky that held more stars than the city ever let you see, and he thought about 11 months of highways and the strange, specific gravity of this particular Tuesday in August that had somehow managed to catch him and hold him in place. He thought about Danny, about a man who stopped for people, who didn't have to think about it. He thought about an old man's hand gripping his wrist in the dirt. Don't let them take the case. Jack looked back at the hospital. He thought about a rule, about keeping moving, about how the thing you've been running from has a way of eventually putting something directly in your path that you simply cannot ride around. He walked back inside. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. And before this was over, a lot of powerful people were going to discover exactly what happened when the man they'd left to die in the desert decided, for the first time in 11 months, to stop running and stand still. They came before sunrise, not loudly. Not the way people expected a group of Hell's Angels to arrive anywhere. No revving engines, no theater. 6 motorcycles rolled into the hospital parking lot in near silence, headlights low, and parked in a deliberate line along the east wall where the security cameras had the best angle. Jack had been awake since 3. He'd spent the night in the chair beside Robert's room. Not inside, the nurses had drawn a firm line about that, but close enough that the door was always in his peripheral vision. He'd dozed twice, briefly, the way soldiers and long-haul riders learn to sleep, present enough to respond, gone just far enough to recover. When the motorcycles came in, he heard them from the hallway window and was outside before the last engine cut off. Bishop was already dismounting. Ray Callahan was 58 years old, built like a fire hydrant, with a gray beard he'd been growing since Reagan's second term, and eyes the color of old gunmetal. He'd been chapter president for 14 years. He had a way of standing in a space that made the space feel like it was now his, regardless of who'd been there first. He looked at Jack for a moment without speaking. Then he said, "You look terrible." "I've had better nights." "The SUV still around?" "Wasn't here at midnight. It'll be back." Bishop nodded slowly, looking over the parking lot with the same systematic attention Jack had used the night before. The other 5 riders, Martinez, Decker, 2 brothers. Jack knew only as Crow and Flatline, and a woman named Linda Hayes, who rode in the middle of the group and was watching everything with the quiet alertness of someone who had been trained to notice what other people miss, spread out without being told to. Not clustered. Positioned. Visible from multiple angles simultaneously. "Linda," Jack said, nodding. "Nomad." She gave him a brief look that contained a full assessment. "You activate a beacon on a desert highway and then spend the night in a hospital chair. Hell of a Tuesday." "It was Monday, actually." "Even better." She glanced toward the hospital entrance. "The old man's okay?" "Stable. They want to keep him another day, but he's already arguing about leaving." "Good sign," Bishop said. "Dead men don't argue." Jack allowed himself half a smile at that. Then the smile faded. "I want to walk you through what I know," he said to Bishop. "All of it. Because I think we're in something bigger than a bad cooling system." Bishop pulled out his second cigarette of the morning. "Start talking." It took Jack 20 minutes to lay it all out. He was precise the way he'd learned to be in situations where precision was the difference between a good outcome and a disaster. He didn't editorialize. He didn't speculate out loud. He stated facts in the order he'd acquired them and let Bishop draw his own conclusions, because Bishop's conclusions were generally worth having. When he finished, Bishop smoked for a moment without speaking. Then, "You said 2 people knew the destination, the editor and the attorney." "That's what Emily told me." "And Robert has doubts about one of them now." "He didn't say which one, but yeah." Bishop looked at the cigarette. "That's your real problem, not the SUV, not the people circling the hospital. Your real problem is that somebody on the inside told somebody on the outside, and until you know who, you can't trust the next handoff." "I know." "So what's the plan?" "The original plan was to deliver the briefcase to Sarah Whitmore at a specific location. I think that location is burned." "You think, or you know?" "I think," Jack admitted. "But I'm not willing to bet Robert's life on being wrong." Bishop crushed the cigarette under his boot. "So you need a new plan?" "I need a better one," Jack said. "Not just different, better." They stood there for a moment, 2 men in the pre-dawn quiet, and the idea began to form between them the way good plans sometimes do. Not all at once, but in pieces, each piece arriving with the quiet click of something fitting correctly into something else. "What's the opposite of one secret meeting?" Jack said. Bishop looked at him. "No secret meeting," Jack said slowly. "No single handoff. No one location that can be compromised." The 2 men looked at each other. "You make it impossible to stop," Bishop said. "Because it's already everywhere," Jack said. Bishop said nothing for a moment. Then he pulled out his phone and handed it to Jack. "Call the journalist first, before anything else moves. Wake her up if you have to. She needs to hear this from you before she hears it from anyone else." Jack took the phone. He went inside to find Emily. Emily was awake. He hadn't expected anything different at this point. She was sitting in the chair beside her father's bed when Jack came in, and the silver briefcase was on the floor between them, the chain still running to Robert's wrist, like a physical reminder that this wasn't over. that it would not be over until they chose to end it on their own terms. Robert was awake too. He looked better, stronger, irritated, which Jack had correctly identified as a healthy sign. "There are 6 more of them outside," Emily said when Jack came in. She wasn't scared saying it. That had shifted sometime during the night. "6 more of my people," Jack said. "They came when I called." Robert watched him from the bed. "You told them everything?" "Everything I knew." "And they came anyway?" "They came anyway." Robert was quiet for a moment. Then, "I owe an apology to some of my prior assumptions." "Forget it," Jack said. "I need to talk to both of you about the plan, because I think we need to change it." He pulled the chair from the corner, the same chair he'd used the night before, and sat down between them and laid it out. The compromised location, the question of who had leaked it, the alternative he and Bishop had begun building in the parking lot. Emily listened without interrupting. Robert listened the same way, but his expression changed faster. The engineer in him, Jack suspected, running calculations in real time, testing the logic, checking for structural weaknesses. "You want to make the evidence impossible to suppress by distributing it before it can be stopped," Robert said. "Yes." Multiple recipients simultaneously. Sarah Whitmore contacts her editor and the attorney herself, but this time not to coordinate the delivery location, to tell them it's happening right now. Digital copies go to multiple secure locations first. The physical documents get authenticated in front of witnesses. "The moment it exists in 5 places at once," Robert said. "Destroying it in one place means nothing." "That's right. The people following us. They've been operating on the assumption that they only need to intercept one briefcase," Emily said slowly, understanding it as she said it. "One meeting, one exchange. And once that assumption stops being true," Jack said, "they lose their leverage completely." Robert looked at the briefcase. For the first time since Jack had met him, the old man's shoulders dropped slightly, not from defeat, but from something closer to the release of a weight that had been carried for a very long time by a person who had been holding it alone. 3 years, Robert said quietly. "I've spent 3 years trying to do this the right way. Through the right channels, by the rules." He paused. "You're telling me the right answer was to stop playing by rules that were designed to work against me." "I'm telling you the right answer is to change the game," Jack said. "So the rules they've been using don't apply anymore." Emily looked at her father. Robert looked at Jack. "Call Sarah," Robert said. Sarah Whitmore answered on the second ring, which told Jack she hadn't been asleep either. She was 51, Emily had told him, a 20-year investigative journalist who had broken 3 significant stories in the last decade, and had the particular fearlessness of someone who had been threatened enough times that threats had stopped being effective. Jack put the phone on speaker so Robert could hear. "Mr. Carter," Sarah said when Robert identified himself. "Are you all right? I heard there was an incident." "Someone tried to kill us," Robert said, with the flat directness of a man who had decided at some point in the last 12 hours that softening things was a luxury he could no longer afford. "Or at minimum, leave us unable to complete this. The location we agreed on may be compromised." A brief silence on the other end. "How certain are you?" Sarah asked. "Certain enough that I'm not willing to walk into it," Robert said. "All right." Her voice was crisp, professional. The fear, if it was there, was filed somewhere it wasn't interfering with function. "What do you want to do?" Jack leaned forward. "This is Jack Mercer. I'm helping the Carters. We're proposing a simultaneous distribution." "Who are you exactly?" "Someone who found these 2 people dying in the desert yesterday morning and made a decision not to keep writing." A pause. "Fair enough. Go ahead." Jack laid it out. When he finished, Sarah was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. "Digital copies go to me, my editor, the attorney, and 1 additional recipient of Robert's choosing," she said. "Simultaneously. Before any physical meeting." "Before," Jack confirmed. "And the physical documents?" "Authenticated in front of witnesses. Multiple witnesses. Not in a private office. Somewhere public enough that the authentication itself becomes part of the story. That's a significant departure from what we planned, Sarah said. The plan got people chained to a briefcase in a hospital bed, Jack said. So yes, significant departure. Another silence. This one had a different quality. I can make calls, Sarah said. Give me 1 hour. You have 40 minutes, Jack said. Because I think the people watching this hospital are going to escalate when they realize Robert is stable and recovering, and I want to be moving before that happens. He ended the call and looked at Robert. Robert Carter, 63 years old, retired engineer, a man who had spent 3 years being redirected and delayed and ignored and nearly killed, looked back at him. How do you know they'll escalate? Robert asked. Because that's what happens when people who thought they had time realize they don't, Jack said. Patience becomes panic, and panicking people make mistakes. He stood up. But I'd like to be out of this hospital before they get to the mistake-making part. The SUV came back at 7:42 in the morning. Martinez spotted it first. He was positioned near the main entrance, leaning against a concrete pillar with a coffee cup, and the appearance of a man with nowhere particular to be, which was either very convincing or made no difference at all, because the vest and the patch were going to get attention regardless. He texted Jack 2 words. It's back. Jack was in the hallway outside Robert's room. He read the message and texted back, how many? 2 in the vehicle. Maybe more. Stay visible. Don't approach. Obviously. Jack pocketed the phone. He looked down the hallway. Emily was coming toward him from the nurse's station, moving fast enough that he knew something had happened before she opened her mouth. Dad wants to leave, she said. I know. We're working on... No, she said, and she grabbed his arm briefly, which she hadn't done before, which meant this wasn't the same as yesterday's version of Dad wants to leave. He pulled his IV out. Jack closed his eyes for approximately 1 second. Then he went into the room. Robert Carter was sitting on the edge of the hospital bed in his clothes from yesterday, shoes already on, the briefcase in his lap, looking at Jack with the expression of a man who has made his decision and is prepared to defend it on multiple fronts. We need to go, Robert said. Right now. Not in an hour. Now. You pulled out your IV, Jack said. I'm aware. The doctors, then be angry at me from a safe distance. Robert stood, steadied himself, did not accept Jack's instinctive move to help, and Jack let him have that dignity. I have been in this room for 16 hours. I am stable. I am hydrated. I am considerably more rested than I have any right to be given the circumstances. He picked up the briefcase, and the chain pulled taut against his wrist. And there is a dark SUV in the parking lot with 2 people in it, who have already tried once to make sure this... He lifted the chain slightly. Never reaches anyone. He looked at Jack directly. I am 63 years old, Robert said. I have a heart condition that I manage perfectly well with medication, and I have spent 3 years being told, in various polite and impolite ways, that I should be tired of fighting this fight. His voice didn't shake. I am not tired. I am angry. There is a difference. Now, are we moving, or are we waiting for them to figure out which hospital room I'm in? Jack looked at him. Then he took out his phone and called Bishop. We're moving, he said. In 10 minutes. Do you have a vehicle that doesn't look like any of us? Bishop said, Linda's got a 2019 Camry, brown. Nobody looks at a brown Camry. Perfect. Have her pull it to the south exit, staff entrance, and I need the rest of you visible at the main entrance and the east side. All 6 of you, right now. Creating a distraction, Bishop said. Not a question. Creating a very obvious, completely deliberate, hard-to-miss distraction, Jack said. The Camry leaves quiet while they're watching the main show. 10 minutes, Bishop said. The next 10 minutes were the tightest 10 minutes Jack had navigated since a situation in Tucson 7 years ago that he was not going to think about right now. Emily moved fast. She was her father's daughter in this way. When a decision was made, she committed to it completely. No hesitation, no revisiting. She gathered the few things they had, helped Robert with his jacket, and was ready to move before Jack finished his second call. The second call was to Sarah Whitmore. "We're leaving the hospital," Jack said when she answered. "Are your copies ready?" "Sending them in the next 15 minutes, Sarah said. "My editor has agreed. The attorney—" A slight pause. "The attorney was unavailable this morning." Jack felt something tighten in his chest. "Unavailable how?" "Not answering calls or messages since 6 a.m. His office says he called in and said he had a personal emergency." Jack processed that. "Who's your fourth recipient? The one Robert chooses?" "That's what I was about to ask." He looked at Robert. "The journalist needs a fourth person to receive copies. Someone completely outside the existing chain. Someone who doesn't know what's coming." Robert thought for about 3 seconds. "Dr. Anita Reeves, University of Arizona Environmental Sciences Department. She's been publishing research on groundwater contamination in drought regions for 12 years. She doesn't know me. She has no connection to this. She'll receive evidence out of nowhere," Emily said. "Which means nobody could have warned anyone she was receiving it," Robert said. Jack relayed the name to Sarah. Sarah said she could find contact information. She gave him 11 minutes. He gave her 8. Then he looked at the south exit, at the brown Camry, idling there with Linda Hayes behind the wheel, and he looked at Robert Carter holding a silver briefcase with a chain around his wrist. And he thought about the dark SUV at the main entrance, and about 6 bikers who were at this moment making themselves the loudest, most visible thing in the parking lot, while 2 people needed the back door to work. "Ready?" he said to Robert. "I've been ready for 3 years," Robert said. They went. "Ja." The south exit deposited them into a service lane that ran behind the building. Linda had the Camry's engine running and the doors unlocked before they reached the car. She didn't ask questions, and she didn't make small talk. She pulled out of the service lane in one smooth motion and had them 2 blocks from the hospital in under a minute. Robert sat in the back with the briefcase in his lap. Emily sat beside him. Jack sat in the front passenger seat, watching the mirrors. "Anything?" Linda asked. "Nothing yet." "Yet," she said. "Give it 2 minutes." It was 90 seconds. A black SUV appeared 3 blocks back, moving at the same pace as the surrounding traffic, which was more professional than Jack had hoped and less sophisticated than they were apparently prepared for. "They made us," Jack said. "I see them," Linda said. She didn't change her speed. That was the right call. Speeding up meant confirming you'd spotted them. Jack texted Bishop. "Tail on the Camry, black SUV, we need the highway option." Bishop's reply, "Martinez and Crow are already on 40. Stay on surface streets for 6 more minutes, then merge." The plan had always been to put the Camry into the middle of a convoy on Interstate 40, where multiple vehicles would make surveillance difficult and intervention impossible, without generating exactly the kind of scene that people trying to operate quietly could not afford. But 6 minutes on surface streets with a tail was 6 minutes. "Dad," Emily said from the back. Her voice was low and controlled. "How are you doing?" "Extremely well, considering," Robert said. "You're gripping that briefcase very hard." "I'm aware of that too." Jack watched the mirrors. The SUV stayed 3 cars back. Consistent. Patient. "They're not going to do anything on surface streets," Linda said, reading Jack's silence correctly. "No," he agreed. "They want the handoff. They need to know where we're going, not just that we're going somewhere. So they're going to let us lead them. For now." He thought about that. About letting yourself be followed. About the difference between being followed to a destination and leading someone deliberately in the wrong direction. He thought about what Bishop had said. "Martinez and Decker are already on 40. Linda," he said, "when we merge onto the highway, I need you to do exactly what I tell you, exactly when I tell you. Can you do that?" "Sugar," she said. "I spent 6 years dispatching emergency vehicles in Phoenix. I think I can handle a merge." He almost smiled. "Okay," he said. "Here's what we're going to do." The merge onto Interstate 40 happened at 8:23 in the morning, and the black SUV was still 3 cars back when it did. What the SUV did not know, could not have known, was that 2 motorcycles had been pacing parallel streets for the last 4 minutes, and that the moment the Camry merged, those motorcycles merged too, one in front and one immediately behind, with the casual timing of people who had done this before. What the SUV also did not know was that Decker had been running parallel on the service road and merged at the same moment from the on-ramp ahead, his bike slotting into traffic with the practiced ease of someone who made a habit of being exactly where he was supposed to be at exactly the right time. Suddenly, the Camry was not a vulnerable brown car with two targets in the back seat. It was the middle of a moving formation, and the SUV was boxed between a semi-truck and a pickup that had appeared without any apparent coordination, because that was what three people on radio communication could accomplish when they'd been doing this for 20 years. Emily exhaled sharply when she understood what had happened. "They're covered," she said. "We're covered," Jack corrected quietly. "There's a difference." I was watching the mirror. The SUV had slowed. It was trying to read the situation, trying to figure out how this had changed so completely in 30 seconds. "They're going to pull off," Linda said. "Yeah," Jack said, "they are. Because they're not stupid. Because they've lost the intelligence advantage. They thought they were following us. They didn't know we could see them the entire time." He kept watching. When someone realizes they've walked into a situation they don't understand, they don't escalate. They pull back. They call whoever makes the decisions, and they report back, and they wait for new instructions. 3 seconds later, the black SUV took an exit ramp. Emily made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Robert said nothing, but his grip on the briefcase loosened, slightly, for the first time. Jack's phone buzzed. "Bishop. SUV exited east. You're clear. Meeting point in 40. "We have 40 minutes, Jack said. "To get to Prescott?" Emily asked. "To get somewhere better than Prescott," Jack said. He turned in the seat to look at Robert directly. "There's something we haven't talked about yet," he said. Robert's eyes narrowed. "What?" "The attorney, the one who went dark this morning. If he's the one who leaked the meeting location, then he'll know I'm on the move right now," Robert said immediately. "And he'll know it's happening today." Robert looked at this briefcase, which means whoever he's talking to also knows. "How much lead time do they need to intercept a meeting location they don't know yet?" Emily asked. "Depends on what resources they have in Prescott," Jack said. "Which we don't know," Emily said. "No," Jack agreed. "We don't." The car was quiet for a moment. "This is where it gets complicated," Robert said. "This is where it's been complicated," Jack said. "We just see it clearer now." He turned back to face the road ahead. The highway opened up ahead of them, long and straight, the way it does in Arizona, not offering you any comfort about what's coming, just showing you that a lot of ground exists between here and there, and most of it is empty, and all of it is going to have to be crossed before you find out what's waiting at the other end. "Call Sarah," Robert said. "Tell her we need to change locations again." "I was about to," Jack said. "And Jack." He looked back at the old man. "Thank you," Robert said. "Not for today. For last night. For staying when you didn't have to." Jack didn't answer right away. He thought about an empty garage, a helmet on a workbench, a rule about keeping moving. "I had a brother who would have stayed," he said finally. "I've been trying to figure out if that was learned or if it was just who he was." Robert nodded slowly. "What conclusion have you reached?" "I think both," Jack said. "I think some people are born pointing in a direction, and I think the people around them teach them how to walk in it." Robert was quiet for a moment. "He taught you well," he said. Jack turned back to the road. He picked up his phone and called Sarah Whitmore. Outside, the highway stretched on. 3 motorcycles held formation around a brown Camry. And somewhere behind them, someone with a phone to their ear was reporting back to someone that the situation had changed, and they needed new instructions, and the window they'd had was closing. They didn't understand yet that it wasn't closing, it was already shut. And in the back seat of an unremarkable brown car, in the middle of an Arizona highway, a 63-year-old man with a chain on his wrist and 34 years of careful work in a silver briefcase was quietly making peace with the fact that the truth he'd been carrying alone for 3 years was about to become too large for anyone to contain. Robert Carter closed his eyes. He rested. He trusted, for the first time in a very long time, that the people around him knew what they were doing. And on the surface of a different state entirely, the journalist Sarah Whitmore opened her laptop and began to make the calls that would Sarah Whitmore picked up on the first ring this time. "New location," Jack said. No preamble. "The original one is burned. We need somewhere public. Somewhere with witnesses already present that we didn't put there." "How public?" Sarah asked. "The kind of place where if someone tried to take something from an old man, 20 people would see it happen, and half of them would have their phones out." A brief silence. He could hear her thinking. "There's a county library in Chino Valley," she said. 20 miles north of Prescott. Tuesday morning. Reading groups, retired people, regulars. The kind of crowd that notices strangers. "Does it have parking that connects to a main road?" "Front lot faces Route 89, 2 exits. Can you be there in 90 minutes?" "I'm already in my car," she said. Jack ended the call and looked at Linda. "Chino Valley, County Library, Route 89. Linda nodded once and changed lanes without commentary. That was one of the things Jack had come to appreciate about Linda Hayes in the last 12 hours. She did not require explanation for every instruction. She assessed, she decided, she moved. The kind of person you wanted beside you when the margin for error had stopped being theoretical. He texted Bishop the new location. Bishop's reply came in 7 seconds. "Crow and Flatline are already running 89 north. Martinez stays with you. Decker covers the library approach from the south. I'll be at the front." Jack read it twice. Then he put the phone down and allowed himself, for exactly 1 moment, to feel the weight of what was being assembled around him. 6 people who had come without being told why. 6 people who had asked no questions that weren't operational. Who had shown up before sunrise because he had called and said he needed witnesses. And they had understood without explanation that witnesses were sometimes the most powerful thing you could be. He didn't deserve that. He'd spent 11 months convincing himself he didn't deserve much of anything, which was grief's particular cruelty. It didn't just take the person. It took your confidence in your own value, 1 mile at a time. He put the feeling away. Later. There was a later coming, and he could take it apart then. Right now, there was a library in Chino Valley, and 60 miles of Arizona highway, and a man in the back seat who had already pulled out his own IV once today, and would absolutely do it again if the situation required it. "Emily," Jack said. "How's he doing?" "He's resting," she said quietly. And then, lower. "He's pretending to rest, but he's actually listening to everything." "I am not pretending anything," Robert said, without opening his eyes. Emily looked at Jack and shook her head with the specific exhaustion of a daughter who has been managing this particular man for 29 years and is no longer surprised by anything he does. "The 4th copy," Jack said, loud enough for Robert. "Dr. Reeves, Sarah said she reached her?" Robert opened his eyes. "What did she say?" She was confused. Then she was very not confused. Then she asked how long Sarah had had these documents, and Sarah said about 40 minutes. And there was a silence, and then she said she'd been waiting for documentation like this for 6 years. Robert's jaw tightened, not from pain. 6 years, he said quietly. She's been watching the same contamination patterns from the academic side. Her research validates your engineering data from a completely independent direction, Emily said. They've never spoken, they've never collaborated, but they've been building toward the same conclusion from opposite ends. That's not a coincidence, Robert said. That's a pattern that kept surfacing despite every attempt to suppress it. Jack looked out at the highway. When 2 people working completely independently reach the same conclusion about the same company using completely different methods, he said, that's not an accusation, that's documentation. That's what makes it unkillable, Robert said. The words sat in the car for a moment. Unkillable. That was what 3 years of patience built toward. Not a single piece of evidence that could be stolen or destroyed or discredited. A convergence. Multiple streams arriving at the same point from directions that no single act of suppression could have blocked simultaneously. Robert looked at the briefcase. "I need the key," he said. Emily turned to him. "Dad, the chain," he said. "I need the key to unlock it from my wrist." He held up his left hand. "My hand has been numb for the last hour, and I would like to arrive at this library able to open the briefcase without my fingers failing me at the critical moment." Emily dug in her bag and produced a small key. She unlocked the padlock. The chain fell away. Robert rubbed his wrist slowly, working the circulation back, and Jack watched the old man's face cycle through something he didn't have a name for. The expression of someone setting down a physical burden that had also been a psychological one, and discovering that the weight was heavier than they'd consciously acknowledged. "How long did you carry it like that?" Jack asked. "Since yesterday morning," Robert said. "Before we left Kingman." He paused. "I knew something was wrong when the temperature gauge moved. I locked myself to it before we pulled over." "You knew someone would come looking," Emily said. "I hoped someone would come looking," Robert corrected quietly. "I just didn't know if it would be the right kind of someone." He looked at Jack. Jack said nothing. He turned back to the road. But something in his chest did a thing that it hadn't done in 11 months. Something that felt uncomfortably close to purpose. He ignored it. Kept watching the mirrors. They were 40 minutes out from Chino Valley when Jack's phone rang. He didn't recognize the number. That was unusual enough to be significant. He answered. "Mr. Mercer." The voice was male. Smooth. The particular smoothness of someone who practiced it. "I understand you've been helping the Carter family this morning." Jack said nothing. "I think there may have been some misunderstanding about the situation," the voice continued. "Robert Carter is an elderly man with a serious heart condition who has been under considerable stress. The documents he's carrying represent his personal interpretation of events that—" "Who is this?" Jack said. A brief pause. The smoothness recalibrated. "My name isn't important. What's important is that we resolve this before it becomes more complicated than it needs to be. The Carters have been through a frightening experience. We want to make sure they're compensated for their inconvenience and that Mr. Carter gets the medical attention." "Stop," Jack said. The voice stopped. "You just made a mistake," Jack said quietly. "Do you know what it was?" Silence. "You called me," Jack said, "which means you have my number, which means someone gave it to you. And the only person who had my number in connection with any of this is a lawyer who's been unreachable since 6 o'clock this morning." He paused. "Now I know which one it was." The smoothness cracked, just slightly, a fraction of a second's hesitation. "Mr. Mercer, I'd encourage you to consider." Jack ended the call. He looked at his phone for a moment. Then he turned to Linda. Someone just confirmed the attorney was the leak. Linda kept her eyes on the road. "How?" "They had my number. The only way to have my number is through the attorney. The only way the attorney had my number was through Emily." He looked in the mirror at Emily. "You gave him my number this morning, before we left the hospital." Emily's face had gone pale. "I called to update him on what had happened. When he didn't answer, I left a voicemail, with your name and number in case he needed to coordinate." "He listened to that voicemail," Jack said, "and he passed it along." "To them," Emily said. "To them," Jack confirmed. The car was very quiet for a moment. Then Robert said, "Who else does he know?" And that was the question. That was the one that hung in the air with real weight, because it wasn't a question about the past. It was a question about the next 40 minutes. "Does the attorney know about Dr. Reeves?" Jack asked. "No," Emily said immediately. "We added her this morning," which was the important thing. The attorney was a compromised in a network that had already rerouted around him. He knew the original meeting location, which was burned. He knew about Sarah and the editor in general terms. He knew Jack's name and phone number. What he didn't know was that right now, on a Tuesday morning in Arizona, a university researcher named Dr. Anita Reeves was opening an encrypted email from an investigative journalist she'd never spoken to before, and reading documents that were going to reframe 6 years of her own research and reaching for her phone. "We're okay," Jack said. He said it with the certainty of calculation, not reassurance. He can't stop what's already in motion. He can only try to intercept the physical documents, which means the library location matters a lot in the next 40 minutes. Bishop has it covered, Linda said. Bishop has the approach covered, Jack said. I need to think about what happens inside. His phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. He stared at it. The text said, "They know about the library. Someone on police scanner. How many is enough to stop you?" He looked at it for 3 seconds. Then he typed back, "Who is this?" The reply came immediately. "Friend of Sarah's. She said to trust me. Turn on your radio." Channel 7. Linda already had her hand on the dial. She tuned to Channel 7. A voice crackled through. Male, nervous, clearly not trained for this. "There's a vehicle convoy headed north on 89. 3 motorcycles and a brown sedan. They have the documents. Intercept at the library before..." Linda turned the radio off. Nobody spoke for 2 full seconds. Then Emily said, "They're monitoring police scanners." "Or broadcasting on one," Jack said. "Either way, they just told everyone listening where we're going and what we have." "Which means..." Emily stopped. "Which means the library isn't safe anymore," Robert said. His voice was completely flat. The engineering mind, absorbing new data and updating its model without the luxury of emotional processing. "We need a new location," Jack said. "Right now, in the next 5 minutes." "There is no new location," Emily said. "We can't keep changing." "She's right," Robert said. He said it with a quietness that made Jack turn to look at him. The old man's expression had changed. Something had settled in it. "We cannot keep running. Every time we move, we give them another opportunity to find us. Every new location is another location that can be compromised." He looked at the briefcase. "We chose this fight. We have to finish it somewhere." "Not the library," Jack said. "No," Robert agreed. "Not the library." He was quiet for a moment. "How many people are following us right now that we know of?" Robert asked. "The SUV that pulled off earlier, potentially more. Whatever units they can coordinate in the next 20 minutes. Jack looked at Linda. "The people on that radio call. They're ahead of us." "They're setting up at the library," Linda said. "Yes. Which means the library approach is their focus right now. For the next 20 minutes, until they figure out we're not coming." 20 minutes, Robert said. He was working through something. Jack could see it. "What is the most public possible location within 20 minutes of our current position that has no prior connection to this situation? Something completely random. Something they couldn't have anticipated and cannot prepare for." Jack thought. Linda thought. Emily pulled out her phone. "Dewey Humboldt," Emily said. "There's a VFW hall on the main street. It's Tuesday. They have a morning coffee hour open to the public every Tuesday. Community thing. Veterans, retirees, locals." "Who goes to that?" Jack asked. "Veterans, retirees, people who have seen things and don't scare easily," Robert said quietly. And something in his voice had shifted again. A new quality. Something that wasn't quite hope, but was pointed in that direction. "People who understand what it means when someone in authority decides the rules don't apply to them." Jack looked at Linda. "Dewey Humboldt," she said. 14 minutes. "Call Bishop," Jack said. She already had her phone out. Bishop did not like the change. Jack could tell because Bishop's voice lost 3 degrees of warmth in 5 seconds, and his sentences became shorter and more precise, which was how he communicated displeasure without communicating panic. "VFW Hall," Bishop repeated. "Dewey Humboldt, Main Street. You're ahead of us on 89. You'll get there first." "I don't know that location." "Neither do they," Jack said. "That's the point." A short silence. "What do you need from me?" Bishop asked. "Get there, walk in, explain. Briefly, Bishop, briefly, that a retired engineer has documentation of corporate water contamination and needs to authenticate it in front of witnesses in the next 15 minutes. Tell them he's going to be arriving with a biker escort." Another silence, longer this time. "A VFW hall full of veterans," Bishop said slowly. "Yes. That's actually, yeah." Something in Bishop's voice changed. "Yeah, okay, I can work with that. Flatline and Crow are on 89 already?" 3 miles ahead of you. Tell them to pass the library. Don't slow down. Don't look at who's waiting there. Just pass it, and be visible. Let whoever's waiting think the convoy is coming. Buying you time to slip off to Dewey Humboldt. Buying us time, Jack said. All of us. 14 minutes, Bishop. He put the phone down. Robert was looking at him with that precise, evaluating look. You've done this before, he said. It wasn't quite a question. Not this specifically, Jack said, but something like it. Jack thought about Tucson. About a situation 7 years ago, involving a different kind of evidence, and a different kind of wrong, and a version of himself that was younger and angrier and less certain of the difference between intimidation and protection. Something like it, he said. Were you on the right side? Robert asked. Jack considered the question seriously. I've been on the wrong side of some things, he said. I know what that feels like. This doesn't feel like that. Robert nodded. Good enough for me. The VFW hall in Dewey Humboldt was exactly what Emily had described, which Jack absorbed as a piece of operational data more than anything else. What mattered was what Bishop reported in the text that arrived 2 minutes before they pulled off the highway. 12 veterans inside. Average age 68. Commander's name is Walt Dries, Korean War. He said, and I'm quoting directly, "Son, I didn't spend 2 years in a foxhole so a water company could poison people. Bring them in." Jack showed the text to Robert. Robert read it once, then again. Then he said quietly, "God bless America." They pulled into the small parking lot at 10:47 in the morning. Jack got out first. Always. He had learned this the way you learn everything that keeps people safe, by understanding that the first 30 seconds of an arrival set the tone for everything that follows, and that the tone he needed right now was not intimidating. It was not aggressive. It was something much harder to project deliberately. It was, "We are people doing something important, and we are asking for your witness." He walked in ahead of Robert and Emily. Walt Dries was 78 years old, with a handshake that could have cracked stone, and he looked at Jack's vest and then at Jack's face and apparently decided that the face was more relevant. "Your friend called ahead," Walt said. "Thank you for having us," Jack said. "I want to be clear about what's happening here," Walt said. He wasn't unfriendly. He was precise. Another man who had spent a lifetime dealing with situations where imprecision had real consequences. "You're telling me this man has evidence of corporate contamination in Arizona water systems?" "Yes, sir." "And you're telling me that people have been actively trying to prevent this evidence from reaching anyone who can act on it?" "Yes, sir." "And you need witnesses." "We need witnesses," Jack confirmed. Walt looked past him at Robert, who had just come through the door with the silver briefcase, and at Emily beside him, and at Linda Hayes, who came in last and stood by the entrance with the quiet attention of someone who understood that her job right now was to watch the door, not the room. Walt turned back to Jack. "A man I knew," Walt said, "spent 40 years in the Army Corps of Engineers. He used to say that the most important thing an engineer does isn't build, it's warn." He paused. "Sounds like this man warned. Sounds like somebody didn't listen." "They did more than not listen," Jack said. Walt nodded slowly. "Well," he said, "you've got witnesses now." Sarah Whitmore arrived 8 minutes later. She was small, dark-haired, with the energy of someone who had been running on coffee and adrenaline for 24 hours and had made her peace with that being the operating condition for the foreseeable future. She had a digital recorder, a laptop, and a photographer named Greg, who hadn't been told exactly what he was photographing until 20 minutes ago and had apparently decided that was fine. She walked in, took in the room. 12 veterans arranged in a semicircle around a folding table, 2 Hells Angels standing near the walls, Jack Mercer in the center, and a 63-year-old man with a battered silver briefcase sitting at the table, like he had been waiting for this exact moment for 3 years. And she said, "Okay, let's do this." She sat across from Robert. Jack stood to the side. Robert placed the briefcase on the table. He worked the combination lock. Jack noticed that his hands were steady. Whatever trembling had existed that morning from the heat and the medication and the long night in a hospital bed, it was gone. Robert Carter's hands were the hands of a man who had arrived. The briefcase opened. What was inside was not dramatic in appearance. Documents looked like documents. Folders looked like folders. Lab printouts and internal email chains and engineering inspection reports looked like exactly that. Paper covered in text, accumulated with patience, organized with care. But Sarah Whitmore looked at the top page for approximately 4 seconds, and her expression changed in a way that was dramatic. "This is the original?" she said. "The original," Robert confirmed. "My handwriting on the annotations, my signature on the inspection reports, my date stamps." She looked up at him. "Do you know how long I've been trying to get original documentation from inside Desert Crown's inspection chain?" "I have a reasonable guess," Robert said. 11 months, she said. "Every source I found either disappeared or recanted." She paused. "One person I was supposed to meet called me 3 days before our scheduled meeting and said he'd made a mistake, that he didn't have anything useful." She looked at the documents again. He was lying. Someone got to him. "Someone got to a lot of people," Robert said. "That's how this works. You make it expensive enough and frightening enough to tell the truth. And most people calculate that staying quiet is safer." He looked at the documents. "I'm 63 years old. I have a heart condition. I have a daughter who has been terrified for the last 24 hours. He looked at Emily briefly. "The math on staying quiet was very easy to do. I did it every morning for 3 years. "What changed?" Sarah asked. Robert was quiet for a moment. "I met some people who weren't doing any math at all," he said. He looked at Jack. They just stopped. Jack looked at the wall. Sarah turned on her recorder, and Robert Carter began to talk. He talked for 54 minutes. He was precise the way Jack had expected. Dates, locations, report numbers, names of the inspection personnel, names of the laboratory technicians, the specific language that had been changed between preliminary and final reports, and the specific dates on which those changes had been made. He had it memorized the way some people memorize poetry, not because they chose to, but because they lived with it so long it became part of the internal structure. Sarah asked questions that were sharp and exactly right. She had done her homework. She knew which pieces she already had from other sources, and she went directly for the gaps, and Robert filled them with the quiet satisfaction of someone completing a structure that had been missing its load-bearing elements for a very long time. The veterans listened. Walt Dries listened hardest of all, and his face went through several things that Jack watched without commenting on. There was the confirmation of a suspicion. The way a person looks when something they feared was true turns out to be true. There was anger, the slow-burning kind that doesn't show itself in volume. And there was something else, something more complicated, that Jack recognized because he had seen it in his own mirror in the last 24 hours. It was the look of a person deciding that being a witness is not a passive act. At minute 31, Robert reached a particular section of documents. He placed them on the table separately, deliberately, the way you place something fragile. "These," he said, "are the ones that matter most." Sarah looked at them. "These are internal communications from Desert Crown's executive level," Robert said. "They predate my involvement by 4 years. They indicate that the company was receiving alarming readings from multiple groundwater monitoring stations. Readings that, if reported accurately, would have triggered mandatory independent review." He paused. "They didn't report them accurately." "How do you know?" Sarah asked. "Because I have the original monitoring station data," Robert said. "And I have the reports that were filed, and the numbers are different. Not slightly different, significantly different, in specific ways that served specific financial interests." Sarah looked at the documents for a long moment. "They knew," she said, quietly, making sure she understood correctly. "They knew the readings were alarming, and they changed them. For at least 4 years before the families in those communities started getting sick," Robert said. The room was very quiet. Walt Dries put both hands flat on his knees. He looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked up at Robert. "My sister lives in Maricopa County," he said. "She's been on well water her whole life." "I know," Robert said softly. "I know." Jack looked at Emily. She was holding herself very still, with the controlled effort of someone who had been holding it together for 36 hours and was doing the calculation about whether she could afford to stop now. He met her eyes, and she looked at him, and he gave her the smallest nod. The kind of nod that says, "You made it. You got him here. You did the thing." Her jaw worked. She looked at the ceiling for a moment. She held it together. At minute 44, Jack's phone vibrated. He stepped to the side of the room and looked at the screen. Bishop. 3 vehicles just parked on Main Street. Not locals. They know. Jack looked at the door. At Linda, who was still standing near it. She had her phone in her hand, and he could tell from her posture that she'd received the same information through a different channel. He crossed the room to her. 3 vehicles on the street, he said quietly. I counted 2, she said. But I believe Bishop. They can't come in here, Jack said. Not without making a scene in front of 12 veterans and a journalist with a recorder running, Linda said. Which is either going to stop them or make them desperate, Jack said. Right. He looked back at the table. Robert was still talking. Sarah was still recording. Greg the photographer was moving around the edge of the room, quiet and professional, documenting the faces and the documents without flash. Jack thought about timing. The digital copies had gone out before they'd left the hospital. Robert's documents were being photographed and recorded right now. Sarah's recorder was running. 12 witnesses were present, 2 of whom had been specifically asked to remember the date, the time, and exactly what they had seen. The physical briefcase still existed. The original documents still existed. And the people outside apparently still believed that taking the briefcase meant taking the evidence. They didn't understand what had already happened. But Jack didn't want to find out what they'd do when they figured it out. He went back to the table and crouched beside Robert. We have company outside, he said, low and even. Robert didn't stop talking. He finished his sentence, looked at Sarah, said, 1 moment, and then looked at Jack. How much time do we need? Jack asked. 20 minutes, Sarah said. We have about 10 before the people outside decide that waiting is worse than whatever happens if they don't wait. Sarah looked at the recorder, at the documents, at Robert. I need the contamination timeline, she said to Robert. The 4-year gap, that's the center of everything. If I have that and the documentation on record, then everything else is supporting evidence, Robert said. Then the story exists whether or not the briefcase does, Sarah said. Robert understood immediately. He turned to the documents and went directly to the section he needed. He didn't fumble. He didn't search. He went directly to it, because he had been living with these pages for 3 years, and he knew them the way Jack knew his engine. He placed them in front of Sarah. She looked at them. Her recorder was running. Greg's camera was running. 12 veterans were watching. Read them to me, Sarah said. In your own words, what these documents show. Robert looked at the pages. He took a breath, and he told the story. The real one, the full one, the one that had been trying to get out for 4 years through every channel that kept closing. The one that had nearly killed him in the Arizona desert the day before. The one that had ended up in this room because a biker on a lonely highway happened to check his mirror at the right moment. He talked for 11 minutes. When he finished, the room was silent. Then Walt Dries said, Son, I want to be listed as a witness to this, by name, Walt Allen Dries. I served 2 years in Korea and 40 years paying taxes in this state, and I want my name on record that I heard what this man said. 3 other veterans said the same. Sarah looked at Jack. We have enough, she said. Jack looked at the door, at Linda, who nodded once, the signal they'd agreed on, now. Jack stood up. He walked to the center of the room. Robert, he said, we're leaving in 2 minutes. Leave the originals with Sarah. She's the journalist of record. The briefcase stays here. Robert looked at the briefcase, at the documents he'd carried chained to his wrist. Everything in there, Jack said. It's already everywhere else. You don't need to carry it anymore. Robert Carter was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at his daughter. Emily walked to the table. She put her hand on the briefcase. And she looked at her father with 29 years of love and 3 years of fear, and the specific exhaustion of someone who had been strong for so long that they'd forgotten what it felt like to put the weight down. "Let it go, Dad," she said quietly. Robert Carter placed both hands flat on the table. He stood up. He looked at the briefcase one last time. He walked away from it. Jack was already moving toward the door. Linda opened it. Bishop was outside, positioned and ready. Martinez had the engine running on Linda's Camry. Crow and Flatline were on their bikes. The people on Main Street saw them emerge. Jack could feel the moment of decision happening in those vehicles. The calculation being made about whether to move, whether this was the time, whether there were too many witnesses, too many cameras, too many men in Hell's Angels vests standing between them and the thing they'd come for. The calculation took 4 seconds. They didn't move. Jack walked to his Harley. He put on his sunglasses. He looked down the street at the vehicles parked there with their engines idling and their occupants staring at him through glass. He couldn't see through, but they could definitely see through. He looked at them for a long moment. Then he started his bike. The engine caught with the deep, rolling rumble that had been the sound of his life for 22 years, and it sounded different today. Not like an escape, not like a way out, but like something planted, something that intended to stay. Bishop pulled up beside him. "Library's a mess," he said. 4 vehicles. They waited 40 minutes and then figured out we weren't coming." "Did they do anything?" "Circled. Left." A pause. "They've got nobody at the library and nobody stopped us here." Bishop looked at him. "They've got nothing, Jack." "Not yet," Jack said. "Give it 48 hours." He looked back at the VFW hall, where through the window he could see Sarah Whitmore talking into her phone and Greg loading photos onto a laptop, and the story broke at 6 in the morning. Not just Sarah Whitmore's article. The article was the center of it, the documented core, 4,200 words with embedded photographs of original inspection records and a time-stamped authentication trail that included a county commissioner, 2 attorneys, a university environmental researcher connected by video call, and a journalist's editor who had been physically present for every minute of the process. But by the time most people in Arizona sat down with their first cup of coffee, the story had already moved beyond any one outlet's control. Dr. Anita Reeves had published a rapid response analysis on her university's environmental research portal at 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes before Sarah's piece went live, in which she stated, in the careful and precise language of someone who had spent 12 years documenting exactly this kind of harm, that the documents she had reviewed represented what she described as a systematic pattern of data manipulation affecting groundwater safety assessments across multiple Arizona communities, and that the scale and duration of the falsification, if substantiated by independent review, would constitute one of the more serious environmental accountability failures she had encountered in her career. She did not use emotional language. She didn't need to. The numbers she cited in her analysis were emotional language. They were the kind of numbers that, once read, attached themselves to the inside of a person's chest and didn't let go. By 7 a.m., 3 major Phoenix area news stations had picked up the story. By 8, a national wire service had it. By 9, 2 environmental advocacy organizations had issued statements calling for immediate independent investigation. By 10, the Arizona Attorney General's office had acknowledged receiving inquiries and said it was reviewing the published materials. By 11, Desert Crown Utilities had issued a statement through a public relations firm. The statement was 4 sentences long. It used the words unfounded, out of context, and committed to community safety in ways that sounded, to anyone who had read Sarah's article, like a man trying to describe a house fire as a candle incident. Jack read the statement on his phone in the parking lot of a gas station outside Prescott and said nothing. Bishop, leaning against his bike next to him, read it over his shoulder and said, "Unfounded." "Yeah. They called Robert Carter's 34 years of engineering documentation unfounded." "They did." Bishop looked at the phone for another moment. Then he handed it back. "That statement was written by someone who hasn't read the documents yet and is hoping nobody else has either." "Too late for that," Jack said. "Way too late," Bishop agreed. Jack's phone rang. "Emily, "Are you watching this?" she said when he answered. Her voice had the particular quality of someone who has been awake since before the story broke and has been watching it spread in real time from a hotel room in Prescott, oscillating between something that should have felt like victory but kept landing closer to disbelief. "I'm watching it," Jack said. "Sarah's editor called. They've already had 4 former Desert Crown employees reach out this morning wanting to talk." 4. Before noon. Jack stood up straighter. "Employees who were active during the period covered in your father's documents?" 3 of them, yes. One was at a facility Robert specifically flagged in his 2019 inspection. He said Robert's findings were accurate. He said he knew they were accurate when he was there, and he's been carrying it since. A pause. "He sounds like someone who's been waiting for a door to open." "Now it has," Jack said. "Sarah says this changes the story completely. She thought she had a documentation story, falsified records, buried reports. Now she might have people who were inside the process willing to go on record." "Does your father know?" "He's been on the phone with Sarah since 6:30. Jack, he's crying. He's been alone with this for 3 years, and now it's—" She stopped. When she started again, her voice was steadier, but it had cost her something to make it so. "He's just really glad people are finally believing him." Jack looked at the sky. Blue and enormous and indifferent in the way Arizona skies are, not cruel, just vast, big enough to put everything that happens beneath it into a perspective that is either comforting or annihilating, depending on where you're standing. "Tell him I'm glad too," Jack said. "He wants to see you," Emily said. "Before you go, he wants to say something to you that isn't over the phone." "I'll come by the hotel," Jack said. He hung up. Bishop was looking at him. "You're going home after this," Bishop said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah." "Good." Bishop said it with the weight of a man who had been watching another man run for 11 months and had been patient about it, in the way that people are patient when they understand that certain things have to be arrived at from the inside. "It's time, Jack." Jack didn't answer. He put the phone in his pocket and looked at the road. "You know what Danny would say right now," Bishop said. "Don't," Jack said. "He'd say—" "I know what he'd say," Jack said. Quietly, not harshly. The way you say something when the truth of it is so accurate, it almost hurts to hear it confirmed out loud. Bishop let it go. They stood there for another minute in the morning quiet. 2 men who had known each other long enough that silence between them was not an absence of communication. "I'll ride with you to the hotel," Bishop said finally. "Then I've got to get Martinez and Crow headed back. They've got obligations." "Thank you," Jack said. "For all of it. For coming when I called. For not asking the kind of questions that would have slowed things down." "You called," Bishop said simply. "You're my brother. That's the whole conversation." The hotel was a mid-range place off the main road in Prescott, the kind that exists in every mid-sized American city and serves the function of being exactly what's needed without trying to be anything more. Robert was in room 14 on the ground floor. Emily answered the door when Jack knocked and stepped back to let him in. Robert was sitting in the chair by the window with the television on mute, watching the ticker scroll at the bottom of a news channel. He looked up when Jack came in, and the expression on his face was one Jack hadn't seen on him before. Not the careful engineering mind assessment of the hospital room, not the focused determination of the car and the highway, not the controlled intensity of the library meeting room. He looked unburdened. Not light exactly. People who carry what Robert had carried for 3 years don't get light overnight. But unburdened, the specific physical quality of someone who has put something down after a very long time of holding it and is still getting used to what their own hands feel like without it. "Sit down," Robert said. Jack sat. "I've been thinking about what to say to you since yesterday," Robert said. "I had a whole version of it in my head that was very organized. Very systematic." He almost smiled. "Very engineer." "What happened to that version?" "Emily told me it sounded like a performance review." He did smile now, small and genuine. She was right. "What's the other version?" Jack asked. Robert looked at him directly. "You turned around on that highway because something bothered you enough in your rearview mirror that you couldn't keep going." Not because you knew us. Not because it was required. Not because anyone would have known or blamed you for driving past. He paused. And then you stayed. Through the hospital. Through the night. Through everything that came after it. I stayed because it needed doing, Jack said. I know that, Robert said. That's the part I want you to understand. I understand. You didn't stay because you were looking for something. You didn't stay because you wanted credit or gratitude or anything from us. You stayed because leaving would have been the wrong thing, and you knew it, and that was sufficient reason. He stopped. I have met a lot of people in my life, Jack. A lot of people who were good when being good was easy and convenient. What you did was not easy or convenient, and you did it anyway. And then you called people who did the same. Jack said nothing. My daughter trusts you, Robert said. Emily does not trust easily. She gets that from her mother. From me too, honestly. He looked at his hands. The chain was gone now. One of the attorneys at the library had produced bolt cutters from her car, with the resigned practicality of someone who has learned to anticipate unusual needs. There was still a faint mark on his wrist where it had been. He looked at that mark. When I was lying in the dirt on that highway, I thought that this was how it ended. That 3 years of work was going to end in the dirt on the side of a road in August. He looked up at Jack. I am glad I was wrong. Jack leaned forward, elbows on his knees. What are you going to do next? After this is... when the dust settles? Robert's going to testify, Emily said from behind Jack. He glanced back. She was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, watching her father with an expression that was equal parts pride and worry and love, the specific cocktail that belongs to adult children of parents who refuse to slow down. There's already been a preliminary inquiry from the state legislature about his availability. And Sarah mentioned that the EPA regional office has been in contact with her editor. Federal level, Jack said. If the contamination data holds up under independent testing, Robert began. It will, Emily said. If it does, Robert continued, then the question stops being a state enforcement question and becomes a federal one, which means more resources, more authority, and, he paused, considerably more difficulty for the kind of people who've been making this go away at the state level for 7 years. The Meridian connection, Jack said. That's what Sarah is working on today, Emily said. The holding company structure. How the investment interests connect to the approval chain. Who was aware of the falsified data at the investor level and when? She met Jack's eyes. That's the story underneath the story. That's the part that explains why $300 million of development was more important to someone than the Delgado family's drinking water. Jack thought about that family. The youngest daughter who was 9 now and doing better, in the complicated way better meant in that context. He thought about what it meant for the truth to finally be moving toward them across the desert. Not because the channels had worked, not because the system had caught up with itself, but because a 63-year-old man with a chain on his wrist had refused to be tired. Will it reach them? Jack asked. The families who were affected. Will any of this actually reach them? Robert and Emily exchanged a look. I'm going to Rio Seco next week, Robert said, to meet with the Delgados and 2 other families from that area. He paused. I've been in contact with them periodically over the last year, letting them know I hadn't stopped. I don't know if that meant anything to them. It meant something, Jack said with certainty. I hope so. Robert looked at the television. The ticker was still scrolling. Justice, in my experience, is slow and partial and frequently insufficient. But it begins with being believed. With someone looking at what you've been saying and acknowledging that you were right. He turned back to Jack. Those families have spent years being told their concerns were exaggerated, that the readings were within acceptable limits, that the studies were inconclusive. His voice was even, but underneath it was something old and sustained. The residue of years of witnessing people being dismissed by the very systems designed to protect them. Today, for the first time, the entire state is reading documentation that says the opposite. That says what those families experienced was real. That says someone knew and chose to look away. He stopped. That's the beginning of justice, not the end. But the beginning. Jack nodded. Then he stood. I need to head out, he said. Emily pushed off the wall. Where are you going? Home, Jack said. The word landed differently than he'd expected. He'd said it reflexively, the way you say a word you've been avoiding for long enough that when it finally comes out, it surprises you with how ordinary it sounds. How available it's been, just sitting there, waiting. Emily looked at him carefully. Flagstaff? Yeah. How long has it been since you've been back? 11 months, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, is there someone there? Not anymore, he said. There used to be. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Emily had enough context by now to understand the shape of what 11 months of deliberate motion meant, and she was the kind of person who knew when not to push. Robert stood. He was slower than he'd been 24 hours ago. The energy of crisis had burned off, and what was underneath it was a 63-year-old man who had been severely dehydrated and was on blood pressure medication and needed rest more than he would admit. But he stood, and he crossed the room, and he put out his hand. Jack shook it. Robert held it for a moment longer than a handshake required. What you did, Robert said, will keep doing things long after today. You understand that. I know, Jack said. Make stopping worth it, Robert said. Jack looked at him. Those were the words he'd said himself, in the hospital room, when Robert had asked what he wanted in return. Just make stopping worth it. Robert had remembered them and was giving them back to him now, not as an echo, but as a challenge, as a charge. I will, Jack said. He meant it. He rode north out of Prescott alone, which was the way he'd ridden for 11 months, but different now in a way he was still finding the edges of. The difference wasn't the road or the weather or the bike. The difference was somewhere in the quality of the forward motion. For 11 months, moving had been the point. The destination was irrelevant, because arriving anywhere meant stopping, and stopping meant reckoning. Now he was moving towards something specific, and the specific thing was terrifying in exactly the way it had been terrifying for 11 months, and he was going anyway. That was the difference. His phone rang 40 minutes into the ride. He didn't normally answer on the road, but he pulled over when he saw the name on the screen. Sarah Whitmore. I thought you'd want to know immediately, she said when he answered. Tell me. Desert Crown Utilities has just announced a voluntary suspension of operations at 3 of its facilities, pending what they're calling an internal audit. A pause. They made the announcement 11 minutes ago. Jack took that in. Voluntary, he said. That's the word they used, Sarah said, which means they're trying to get ahead of what's coming, rather than be caught standing in front of it. The 4 employees who reached out this morning. Now 6, Sarah said. 2 more called in the last hour. One of them was the laboratory supervisor at a facility Robert inspected in 2020. She has her own documentation. A pause that held a different quality. Jack, she has internal memos from Desert Crown's operations management. Memos that discuss Robert's original findings by name and explicitly outline how they're going to be addressed. Her voice was careful and precise, and doing its best to remain professional around the edges of something that was clearly affecting her. They don't discuss addressing them by fixing the problem. They discuss addressing them by managing the reporting process. They knew, Jack said. The memos are dated 18 months before the first families in Rio Seco started getting sick, Sarah said. If the contents are what this supervisor says they are, and she's agreed to be on record, Jack, full name, documented. Then knowing becomes a choice, Jack said. Yes, Sarah said. Knowing becomes a choice. The quiet on the line between them lasted for a few seconds and carried the weight of that fact. Not just the legal weight of it, though that was significant and was about to become very much more significant, but the human weight of it. The weight of a decision made by people in a conference room somewhere to protect an investment at the cost of children drinking from poisoned wells. The weight of what that decision had done, in the years between the memo and this morning, to the people who had lived inside its consequences without knowing the choice had ever been made. What happens now? Jack asked. Now the story gets bigger, Sarah said. Now it stops being a documentation story and becomes a culpability story. And culpability stories have consequences that documentation stories don't. A pause. I'll be reporting for the next 3 months minimum, maybe longer. And Robert? Robert is going to be the most important witness in an investigation that doesn't officially exist yet but will, she said. He's prepared. He's been preparing for 3 years. Another pause. Jack, I want to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth. Okay. When you were on that highway and you saw that hand, before you turned around, what did you actually think? The question surprised him. Not because it was intrusive, he understood why she was asking, but because it required him to go back to a moment he'd been letting himself not examine too closely. I thought it wasn't my business, he said honestly. And then I thought about what my brother would have done. And what would he have done? He would have turned around immediately, Jack said. He wouldn't have needed the 11 months of driving around telling himself it wasn't his problem. He would have just seen someone needed help and stopped. And you needed him to remind you, Sarah said. He was dead, Jack said. So he reminded me from where he was. Sarah was quiet for a moment. You don't have to answer this if you don't want to, she said. But I'd like to include something about you in the follow-up piece. Not a profile. Just the element of this that doesn't get explained without you. The part about why these people were protected and how. No names, Jack said. Just no names, no patch, no club identification. He was firm but not harsh. What we did because it needed doing. Not for coverage, not for the image. If you put names and patches in the paper, it becomes a story about us instead of a story about Robert and those families. He paused. That's the wrong story. Sarah was quiet for a moment. He could hear her thinking. A source close to the Carters, she said finally. That's fine, Jack said. Can I quote something you said, without attribution? What did I say? A man needed help. We helped him. Jack almost smiled. Yeah, he said. You can quote that. I was 40 miles from Flagstaff when Bishop called. We're getting messages, Bishop said. What kind? The kind we don't usually get. A pause that was uncharacteristic for Bishop, who was not a man who paused. People are sending messages to the chapter, through the website, through social media, I guess. I don't really understand how that works. Decker handles all of that. But they're messages about what happened. How many? Decker said 40-something this morning, more coming in. Another pause. Jack, they're thanking us. Jack didn't say anything. People who saw the photographs from the parking lot, Bishop said. People who read Sarah's article, regular people. They're saying things I'm not used to reading about us. He stopped. There's a woman in Tucson who says her husband has a Hell's Angels tattoo on his arm that he got when he was 22, and he's been embarrassed about it for 30 years. She says he's not embarrassed about it today. Jack pulled over to the shoulder without quite deciding to. He sat on the bike in the sun. What do you want to do about it? Jack asked. Nothing, Bishop said immediately. We don't do interviews. We don't hold a press conference. We don't go on television and talk about our feelings about it. His voice was flat and certain. We do what we did. When someone needs it. For the reason we did it. Not for the press. Not for the messages. Not for any of that. Agreed, Jack said. But... Bishop paused again. And this time the pause had a different texture. But I want you to know something, and I want you to hear it clearly. Tell me, what you did out there, turning around on that highway, calling me, putting all of this together, that is what we are supposed to be, Bishop said. His voice was different from his usual register. Stripped down. The way Bishop got when he was saying something he meant more than he was comfortable admitting. At our best, when we're doing it right. That is what brotherhood is supposed to mean. Jack looked at the desert. Bishop, he said. Don't thank me, Bishop said. I'm not telling you so you'll thank me. I'm telling you because it's true, and you should know it. Okay, Jack said. Now go home, Bishop said. Open the damn garage. Jack held the phone for a moment after Bishop hung up, He thought about the garage. He'd thought about it on and off for 11 months, the way you think about a room you've sealed off. Not with anger, not with intention, but with the particular avoidance of grief, which has its own logic that doesn't respond well to reasoning. The garage meant Danny's helmet on the workbench. Danny's tools that he'd left there because he was coming back to finish the carburetor work, and then he hadn't come back. Not in the way people mean when they say coming back. And the helmet had sat there through October and November and December and the New Year and the spring and the summer and the August that Jack had spent crossing and recrossing the state on a motorcycle, because stopping meant eventually walking through that door. He put the bike back in gear. He rode the last 40 miles. Flagstaff was the same. It was always the same in the way of places that mean something to you. They absorb your absence and your return with equal patience, unchanged on the outside in ways that feel either comforting or accusatory, depending on what you need from them. His house was a one-story place on the east side with a detached garage that had been the real reason he'd bought the property. He pulled into the driveway and stopped the bike and sat there for a minute with the engine ticking as it cooled. He looked at the garage door. He got off the bike. He walked across the concrete and put his hand on the door handle and stood there for one more moment, not because he was afraid of what was in there. He knew exactly what was in there, but because some things deserve a moment of acknowledgement before you do them. Then he opened it. It smelled like oil and metal and old coffee from the mug Danny had left on the workbench the last time he'd been here, 6 months before the heart attack. They'd spent a Saturday working on the Harley, talking about nothing in particular, the way brothers talk when they've known each other long enough that the conversation doesn't need a destination. The helmet was on the workbench. Matte black. Danny's helmet. He'd left it because he'd borrowed Jack's for the ride home, because Jack's had better ventilation and it was hot that day. Jack walked over to the workbench. He picked up the helmet. It weighed what helmets weigh. Not heavy, not light. It weighed exactly as much as it weighed, and it didn't feel like his brother any more than any other object felt like his brother. Because his brother was not in objects. His brother was in the particular shape of what Jack understood about stopping for people, about being the person who turns around. He'd known that intellectually for a long time. He knew it differently now. He set the helmet down gently. He sat on the old stool Danny had used when he worked on his bike, and he sat there in the garage in the quiet. And for the first time in 11 months, he was not moving, and the grief was not chasing him, and it didn't catch him and destroy him. It just sat with him. The way grief does when you finally stop making it run. His phone buzzed. Emily. How's Flagstaff? He looked at the message. He looked at the helmet. He looked at the garage he'd been avoiding, which was just a garage, which was full of the memory of a person he loved, which was a thing he was allowed to be in. He typed back. Good. It's good. A moment, then her response. Dad is on the phone with the EPA regional office. He's been on for an hour. He sounds like himself. Good, Jack typed. He told me to tell you something. What? A pause. Then, he said, tell Jack that the Delgado family's water gets tested independently next week. All 3 families from Rio Seco, state-funded. Jack read that twice. State-funded, he typed. How? The county commissioner. Patricia Oñate. She filed an emergency motion this morning. It passed by 4-1. A pause. The one dissenting vote is currently being investigated for ties to Meridian Asset Group. Jack sat with that for a moment. Not the investigation. That was expected. Once the layers started peeling back, you found what was underneath, and you kept finding. What he sat with was the specific image of a family in Rio Seco. A 9-year-old girl. A family that had spent years being told their concerns were exaggerated, and their water was fine, and the studies were inconclusive. Next week, someone was going to come to their door and test the water, and this time it would be state-funded and independent, and the results would go into a record that no contractor could revise after the fact. Because Robert Carr had kept notes for 34 years. Because someone had tried to stop him from delivering them and failed. Because Jack Mercer had looked in his rearview mirror on a Tuesday morning in August and seen a hand in the dirt and made a decision. One decision. One hand. He thought about what Robert had said in the hospital room. Maybe I spent 11 months wondering what he would have done if he were still here. He typed one more message to Emily. Tell your father it was worth stopping. He put the phone down on the workbench. He looked at the helmet. He thought about his brother. Not the absence of him, not the loss of him, but the actual memory of him. The way Danny had laughed. The way he had genuinely, without performance, without calculation, been the kind of person who stopped for strangers because he understood that strangers were just people he hadn't met yet. Jack had spent 11 months running from the grief of that. He hadn't understood, until 2 days ago, that the grief wasn't asking him to forget. It was asking him to continue. He sat in the garage for a long time. When he finally got up, he went to the workbench and picked up the carburetor parts Danny had left mid-project in October. He looked at them. He knew what needed doing. He'd known since October. He'd been the one who taught Danny how to do this work in the first place. He found the tools. He started working. Outside, Flagstaff went about its business. Somewhere to the south, 40 families in drought-stricken Arizona communities were waking up to a news cycle that was finally, after 7 years, aimed in their direction. Somewhere in a hotel in Prescott, a 63-year-old man with a faint mark on his wrist where a chain had been was on the phone with federal investigators, patient and precise, saying things that had been true for 3 years and were only now being recorded in the places where they would be acted upon. Somewhere in a library in Chino Valley, security camera footage of a public authentication meeting existed on a server that 12 different people now had backup access to. And in a garage in Flagstaff, a man who had spent 11 months moving was finally still. Not because he had run out of road, because he had found the reason to stop. The carburetor took 3 hours, not because it was complicated. Jack had done this work 100 times, but because he did it slowly, deliberately. The way you do something when you're not rushing to finish it and get to the next thing, when the doing of it is itself the point. He worked through the afternoon while Flagstaff went quiet around him, and when he was done, he set the finished piece on Danny's workbench and looked at it for a long moment. It was the first thing he'd completed in 11 months. He didn't call it closure, because closure was a word that belonged to people who hadn't lost anyone yet. But he understood, sitting there with grease on his hands and the smell of oil in the air, that the garage was just a garage now. It always had been. The terror of it had been entirely his own construction, and he had built it brick by brick over 11 months of highway miles. And now he had walked through the wall he'd made and found out what he already should have known. His brother was not in the garage. His brother was in the turning around. His phone had been buzzing with messages he hadn't answered since he sat down to work. He picked it up now. 7 texts from Emily, 2 from Bishop, 1 from a number he didn't recognize. He read Emily's first. The first 4 were updates. The EPA regional office had formally requested Robert's full documentation. A second state legislator had called for an emergency session on water safety reporting standards. Desert Crown stock in a related holding entity had dropped significantly on early trading. Information she was relaying the way people relay information when they need to talk to someone but don't know how to start with what they actually want to say. The 5th message said, Dad asked if you'll come to Rio Seco next week, when they do the testing. The 6th said, you don't have to. He just wanted you to know you were invited. The 7th, sent 4 minutes after the 6th, I wanted you to know you were invited too. Jack read that last one twice. He typed back, I'll be there. He read the unknown number next. It was a short message, no greeting, no name. Mr. Mercer, my name is Elena Delgado. Sarah Whitmore gave me your number. I hope that's all right. I just wanted to say thank you. My daughter is 7. I think someone told you she was 9, but she just turned 7 in June. I don't know exactly what you did or how you did it, but we've been waiting for someone to believe us for a long time. Thank you for helping make that happen. Jack sat with that message for a long time. 7. Not 9. 7 years old. I thought about how 2 years of a child's life look from the outside. A number, a correction in someone's accounting. And how they look from the inside of that family, from inside that house, from inside that child's body. He thought about what Robert had said. Justice begins with being believed. He typed back to Elena Delgado. Your family deserved to be believed from the beginning. I'm sorry it took this long. We'll keep going until it's right. He hit send. Then he read Bishop's messages. The first was characteristically brief. Channel 7 Phoenix wants an interview. I said no. Decker said no. Martinez said absolutely not. We're good. The second, also, 38 more messages overnight. Some of them are from vets, some from truckers. One from a retired cop in Tucson who says he's been watching us wrong for 20 years. Decker is crying. Don't tell him I told you. Jack allowed himself a full smile at that. Brief and real. He put the phone down and looked at the helmet on the workbench. Then he picked it up and hung it on the hook by the garage door, where it could be seen when you walked in. Not hidden. Not preserved under a cloth. Just present, the way Danny had been present. Openly, without apology, available to anyone who came through the door. I went inside and took a shower and ate something real for the first time in 2 days, standing at the kitchen counter, because sitting at the table alone felt like a conversation he wasn't ready to have yet. Some things moved faster than others. That was fine. He slept for 9 hours. He hadn't slept 9 consecutive hours since October. The next 3 months moved differently than the 11 before them. Not slower. In some ways faster, because things were happening that required attention and response and presence in ways that forward motion on a highway did not. But differently. Purposefully. The quality of time had changed from something he was consuming to something he was building with. The independent water testing in Rio Seco happened on a Thursday morning, 8 days after the library in Chino Valley. Jack drove down in his truck because Robert had called and said Emily would be there, and he thought Jack should be too. And Jack had found, somewhere between Flagstaff and Rio Seco, that he'd stopped needing to be persuaded to show up for things that mattered. The testing took most of the day. 3 families. 3 wells. State-certified independent contractors with equipment that couldn't be adjusted after the fact, and results that went directly into a chain of custody record that 8 different oversight bodies would eventually touch. Jack stood in the yard of the Delgado home for most of the morning. Elena Delgado was 34 years old, small and precise in her movements, with the particular alertness of someone who had been managing a difficult situation for a long time and had not yet had permission to put it down. Her daughter, whose name was Rosa, was 7 and had her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness, which Jack assessed within the first 10 minutes as formidable. Rosa had decided, with the uncomplicated directness of children, that the large blonde biker was interesting, and she had appointed herself his shadow for most of the morning. "Are you a real Hell's Angel?" she asked him at one point, with the tone of someone conducting a factual inquiry. "Yes," Jack said. "My teacher says Hell's Angels are scary. What do you think?" She considered this with genuine seriousness. "I think you're pretty tall," she said. "But you're not that scary." "That's fair," Jack said. She seemed satisfied with this assessment and went back to watching the testers with the focused attention of a child who has been told something important is happening and takes that seriously. Robert came and stood next to Jack. "How are you doing?" Jack asked. "Better than I have any right to be," Robert said. He was watching Elena Delgado speak with one of the testing contractors, watching her ask questions and write down the answers with the careful precision of someone who had learned over years not to trust that information would find its way to her. She was making sure it did. "She called me last week," Robert said. "Elena, before the testing was confirmed. She called to ask if there was anything she should do to prepare. Any documentation she should have ready." "What did you tell her?" "I told her to document everything going forward. Every test result. Every communication from any government office. Every form." He paused. "I told her to be the person who keeps notes." Jack looked at him. "I told her to be like me," Robert said quietly. And there was something in the way he said it. Not pride exactly, something more complicated than pride. The specific emotion of a person passing something forward. Making the thing they carried not just their own burden, but someone else's tool. The results came in at 4 in the afternoon. They were not good. They were not surprising to Robert, who had known for 3 years what was under that ground. But they were documented, official, irrefutable, signed and time-stamped and entered into the record of a state environmental investigation that was no longer the pet project of one retired engineer and was now a formal proceeding with federal observers. Elena read the results standing at her kitchen table with her daughter beside her and her husband's hand on her shoulder. She read them twice. She looked up at Robert. "So we were right," she said. Not triumphant, not angry, just confirmed. The specific, exhausted relief of a person who has been gaslit for so long that simple confirmation of their own reality feels like something extraordinary. "You were always right," Robert said. "I'm sorry it took this long to prove it." She nodded. She pressed her lips together. She looked at Rosa, who was drawing something at the other end of the table and not fully tracking the conversation. "What happens now?" Elena asked. "Now the data is in the record," Robert said. "And the record goes to people who have authority to act on it. And those people are now being watched by other people who are making sure they act on it." He paused. "It won't happen overnight. I won't lie to you and tell you it will. But it will happen. And you will know every step of the way." She looked at Jack. He wasn't sure what she was looking for, but whatever it was, he tried to give her the honest version of it. Not reassurance without substance, but the face of someone who had been 2 days into this and was prepared to still be part of it 6 months from now. "Thank you for coming," she said. "We'll keep coming," Jack said, "until it's done." The twist that neither Jack nor Robert had anticipated arrived 6 weeks later, and it came not from Desert Crown or Meridian Asset Group or any of the forces that had spent 3 years suppressing the truth. It came from Marcus Hale, the attorney who had gone dark the morning they left the hospital. The man who had advised Robert for 2 years, who had suggested the original meeting location, who had disappeared into a personal emergency at the most convenient possible moment. He called Robert directly. Robert called Jack immediately after. "He wants to meet," Robert said. His voice was controlled in a way that meant he was working very hard to keep it that way. "He says he has something to tell me. He says he's been trying to decide whether to do this for 6 weeks. "Don't meet him alone," Jack said. "I know. Take Emily." "She's already in the car," Robert said. She heard the call. A pause. "Jack," he said. Robert stopped, started again. "He said he wants me to know that he spent 18 months doing what they asked him to do. Slowing things down, redirecting the timeline, keeping me from moving too fast." Another pause. "And that for the last 6 months, he's been keeping copies of his communications with them. Every instruction, every payment record, everything." Jack was very still. "He's been building his own case," Jack said slowly. "He says he realized about 8 months ago that the exposure was going to happen eventually regardless of what he did," Robert said. "And he had to decide which side of it he wanted to be on when it did." "He chose late," Jack said. "There was no judgment in it exactly, but no softness either. The fact was the fact." "He chose," Robert said. Quiet. "I don't know what to do with the rest of it." Jack thought about that, about the complicated arithmetic of people who are complicit and then aren't, who help and then help differently, who come forward not from pure courage, but from the calculation that the math has changed. He thought about whether that kind of help was worth taking. He thought about the Delgado family, about Rosa, about what worth taking meant when the alternative was leaving evidence on the table. "Meet him," Jack said, "with witnesses, recorded, everything documented from the first word." He paused. "And then give what he brings to Sarah." "And forgiveness?" Robert asked. I'm not. I'm asking genuinely. I don't know where I am with that." "That's between you and your conscience," Jack said. "I can't tell you where to land on that, but I can tell you that what he brings you matters more right now than how you feel about him bringing it." A long silence. "You sound like an engineer," Robert said. "I sound like you," Jack said. Robert laughed, short and real. "I'll call you after," Robert said. Marcus Hale met them in a diner in Phoenix on a Wednesday morning and handed over a folder of printed documents and a USB drive. He was 55 and looked older. with the specific aging of someone who has been carrying something corrosive for a long time, and it has finally eaten through. He didn't make excuses. He laid out what he had done, and when, and for whom. And he answered every question Robert asked, with the precision of someone who has rehearsed truth as carefully as other people rehearse lies. The documents connected Meridian Asset Group directly to 3 specific acts of report suppression. One of them matched the date of a canceled inspection that appeared in Robert's original documentation. The circle, which had always been there in theory, closed on paper. Sarah Whitmore published the follow-up story 19 days later. It ran in 4 states. It named names. By November, meaningful things had changed. Not everything. Justice moved the way Robert had described. Slow and partial. But the specific things that needed to move had begun moving, and the direction was no longer ambiguous. Independent water testing became mandatory at all Desert Crown facilities, and was extended by legislative action to every facility operating under similar contract structures statewide. 2 senior officials in the relevant state agencies resigned. A federal investigation into Meridian Asset Group was formally opened. Marcus Hale entered into a cooperation agreement with investigators. 3 development projects tied to Desert Crown's falsified data were suspended pending environmental review. The developers' lawyers argued the suspension was premature. The judge reviewing the motion was the kind of judge who reads documentation carefully, and Robert's documentation was airtight. Whistleblower protection legislation that had stalled in committee for 2 years was reintroduced, this time with the backing of the County Commissioner Patricia Oñate and 3 of her colleagues, and passed by a margin that surprised almost everyone except the people who had been paying attention to how the public had responded to Robert's story. The Hells Angels chapter received a formal letter of appreciation from a coalition of environmental and public health organizations. Bishop read it once, framed it, and hung it in the chapter's meeting room next to a photograph of Danny Carter. Not Danny Carter, Jack's brother, but Danny in the colloquial sense, the name the members had quietly given to the spirit of what they'd done. The letter from the public. The one that said thank you. Bishop never told anyone he'd framed it. Jack found out from Decker, who found out from Martinez, who had been there when Bishop hung it, and had the good sense not to say anything to Bishop about it. Jack called Bishop and didn't mention it either. Some things were better acknowledged sideways. The network started small. Jack had been thinking about it since the hospital. Since the moment Emily had asked him, in the parking lot beside her father's overheated truck, why there wasn't a better system for this. For people stranded on isolated desert highways in extreme heat. For the specific and preventable tragedy of a vehicle failing 20 miles from reliable help in temperatures that gave you 40 minutes to find it or stop needing it. He brought the idea to Bishop in October, sitting in the chapter meeting room in Flagstaff, and Bishop listened the way Bishop always listened, completely, without filling the space, until Jack was done. Then he said, "How many people do you need?" "Bikers first," Jack said. "People who are already on those roads. Route 66 regulars, the chapters that run the desert corridors. People who wouldn't have to go out of their way because they're already there." He paused. "Then we expand. Retired firefighters, EMTs, mechanics who'll donate an afternoon. People who know how to help someone in a heat emergency and don't need to be the cavalry, just present," Bishop said. "Just present," Jack agreed. "Carrying water, a tarp, a beacon, being the thing that stops." Bishop looked at him. "You're going to call it something," Bishop said. "I don't care what it's called," Jack said. "I care that it works." Bishop nodded once. "I'll make some calls." The first month, 12 writers signed on across 3 Arizona chapters. By the second month, 17 more. By spring, the network included retired EMTs, 2 volunteer fire departments, a mechanic with a truck who committed to running the Route 66 corridor every Saturday through the summer months, and a retired nurse named Dorothy, who was 71 years old and drove a pickup with a cooler full of water and electrolyte packs, and a first aid kit that would have impressed a paramedic. Dorothy had read about Robert Carter and contacted the chapter directly. "I don't ride motorcycles," she said when Jack called her back. "But I drive, and I have time, and it's hot out there." "That's all it takes," Jack said. "Then I'm in," she said simply. By July, the network had documented 43 assists on isolated Arizona roads. Some were minor: tire changes, overheated radiators, people who just needed water and a working phone signal. Some were not minor. 2 of the 43 were situations where the people being helped would not, in the medical assessments of the EMTs present, have survived another 30 to 40 minutes without intervention. 2 families, 40 minutes. 1 decision to stop, replicated across dozens of people who had been paying attention to the same story and decided that what Jack had done once, they could do too. Jack heard about both assists through the network. He didn't take credit for them. He passed the information to Dorothy, who had appointed herself the network's unofficial record keeper, because she believed, with the conviction of a woman who had been a nurse for 40 years, that the things you documented were the things you could prove mattered. She kept the records. Every assist, every date, every name where people consented to share it, every outcome. She called it the stopped list. Jack loved that immediately and completely. In late October, on a Saturday morning that was cool enough to ride comfortably for the first time since April, Jack took Route 66 south from Flagstaff. Not running, not accumulating miles to use up time. He had somewhere to be. Robert and Emily were meeting him in Kingman, at a diner that had become a habit in the months since. The kind of habit that forms when people who met under extraordinary circumstances discover that they fit in ordinary ones too. Robert had been riding occasionally with the chapter, in Emily's truck, because Emily had held the line on the motorcycle question with a firmness that was, as Robert privately told Jack, completely non-negotiable and not worth the energy of contesting. Emily had started consulting for a public interest environmental law firm in Phoenix. She traveled. She was good at it. She had her father's precision and her own particular fearlessness, the kind that had been there all along and had simply needed the right circumstances to become visible. They texted more than they called. They saw each other when the geography permitted, which was more often than geography technically required. Jack didn't examine that too closely. Some things were better allowed to find their own shape. He was 20 miles north of Kingman when he saw it. A vehicle on the shoulder. Hazard lights going. Hood up. He felt something in his chest. Not dread, not hesitation. Something that had become over the past several months the closest thing he had to a compass. The feeling that said, "This is what you're for." He didn't slow down gradually. He braked. He turned around. He pulled up behind the vehicle, an older sedan, a family, 2 kids visible through the back window. And he got off the bike, and he walked forward. And the father standing beside the open hood turned and registered what he was looking at, and did the thing people do. The double take, the assessment, the vest, the patches, the size of the man. Jack pulled off his sunglasses. He'd been doing that consciously for months now. Not as a gesture, just because it was the right thing. Because eyes mattered in a first moment. Because his brother had taught him, without knowing he was teaching, that the point of showing up was to be actually present, not partially present, not visible from behind the armor of tinted glass. "You need some help?" Jack said. The father looked at him for another second. Then something in his face shifted. The calculation completing. The math coming out in favor of the obvious reality that a man who stops and asks if you need help is probably a man who means it. "Overheated, I think," the father said. "We've got kids in the car. My wife called roadside assistance, but they said 45 minutes minimum, and it's—" "I know how hot it gets," Jack said. "Let me take a look." He had water in his saddlebag. He had a basic toolkit. He had, as of 3 months ago, a small medical kit recommended by Dorothy, who had sent a list of supplies to every network rider with the subject line, "Carry these, don't argue." He assessed the engine in 2 minutes. Coolant low, not catastrophic, manageable. He looked back at the car. 2 kids. A mother who had her window down and was watching him with the same expression Emily had worn in the dirt. The suspended judgment of someone waiting to find out which kind of person they were dealing with. "It's okay," Jack said toward the window. "I can help with this. You're going to be fine." He went to his saddlebag. I thought about a Tuesday in August that had started the same way. A hand in the dirt. A rule about keeping moving. A brother who would have stopped immediately and didn't need 11 months to figure out why. He thought about Rosa Delgado, who was 7 years old, and Dorothy, who drove a pickup full of water on Saturdays, and 43 people on a list that kept growing, and a 63-year-old engineer who had trusted the truth for 3 years, when the truth had nothing to recommend it except that it was the truth. He thought about Emily's message. I wanted you to know you were invited too. I thought about a garage that was just a garage now, and a helmet on a hook, and the carburetor he'd finished on the day he came home, and how completion felt different from arrival. Not the end of a thing, but the beginning of the next. He worked in the sun on the side of the road, a large man in road-worn colors, crouching beside a stranger's car. And the family watched him, and the kids eventually got curious and pressed their faces to the glass. And somewhere in that ordinary, unremarkable moment, that moment that looked like nothing from the outside and was everything from the inside, Jack Mercer understood with the clean, permanent clarity of a thing finally resolved that he had not stopped running in order to stand still. He had stopped running so he could be there, available, present, turned around and moved toward instead of away. That was what Danny had always been. That was what Jack had been learning to become, one stopped motorcycle at a time. The coolant was topped. The engine temperature dropped. The father shook Jack's hand with both of his, the way people shake hands when a handshake is the only available approximation of what they actually mean. Jack got back on his bike. He put his sunglasses on. Then he took them off again and hung them from his vest pocket. He had 20 miles to Kingman and 2 people waiting for him in a diner and a life that had found its shape while he wasn't forcing it. He started the engine. He did not make a rule about anything. He just rode. Toward something. For the first time in a very long time. Toward something. And the desert opened around him in every direction. Vast and indifferent and magnificent. And somewhere in it, on roads exactly like this one, 12 riders and 1 retired nurse in a pickup truck and a mechanic who gave his Saturdays were doing the same thing. Turning around. Stopping. Asking if anyone needed help. One ordinary decision, made by one grieving man on one empty highway, had become the kind of thing that, once it started, simply did not stop. And that is exactly what Jack Mercer chose to be. The man who stopped.